VR Chat, the next frontier. These are the experiences from Gunters' universe. His continuing mission? To seek out and connect with VR devs and passionate enthusiasts. To discuss theories, beliefs, and rhetoric of all kind. And to boldly go where no show has ever gone before.
Hello everybody, welcome to Gunters' Universe. This is show number 7. Tonight I have a few guests with me here around the table to discuss SVVR and the mobile game jam. To my left, I have Lhun. How are you doing, Lhun?
Pretty good.
So I hear you are a QA and systems administrator for a software company, specifically dealing with digital and home interactive signage. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I do a lot of work in, LCD signage, so everybody sees signs in malls and, on the Las Vegas Strip and just about everywhere. So I deal with a content management system, and then we sell hardware as well for digital signage. So I spend a lot of time in hardware quality assurance, and I know a lot about LCD hardware, so and then VR is a personal passion, so I get to blend the two quite a bit, because the stuff I learn in here, I learn and can take back to work and vice versa.
Very cool. And I also have some note that you basically been in the hardware software industry for over a decade, that you have a background in a lot of different things, solution architecture, prototyping, troubleshooting, and you also worked as an educator. So that sounds
I did.
Cool.
Yeah, I do a lot of that. So I worked, teaching students, the ins and outs, so leading up to A+ certification, and then later MCSE and that sort of thing, in your standard PC hardware and user repair, that sort of thing.
Cool. And you said in your current job you do Android development as well?
Yeah, we've got development for running for, so we have a web-based solution. It's mostly HTML5, and then, and Node, and we're using WebRTP and a few other things. But that's one component, and then we have an application framework that is built on DirectX, some OpenGL for Windows-based stuff, and then we have a Linux-based firmware for our software that's running OpenGL as well, and then we do Android development as well for another platform. So it all comes full circle because it's 3D-based technologies to improve video playback in digital signage. So we're a bunch of gamers there too, so we get to play around with, all the things that happen with graphics cards applies to other things like, being able to play 1080p videos on low-end hardware, general stability, that sort of thing. So we're always getting the new toys, and it's a lot of fun.
I'm kidding, Tone. I'm going to stop a stream.
Right on, man.
No, I mean,
So our next guest, to my right, also has done his fair share of Android development.
It's
so his
not
name is aPieceOfFruit. How you doing, my friend?
It's
pretty good,
not
how are you?
because
Yeah, not bad. It's a Tuesday night doing a show. Can't complain. And so, you're one of the developers on one of the Jam projects, Velocity, which I got to play on my S6 gear. It's visually stunning. It's really, experimenting with VR storytelling. Can you share more about that and your involvement?
Sure. I was quite glad to be part of that team, actually. Nick Pidham, also known as Red Up Paw from Fire Panda Studios, sort of banded us together. And yeah, it's pretty good. You got a couple of.
Can you move a little closer to the mic?
Sure. I don't know how
to be nice and loud.
How's that sound?
Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, so yeah, Nick sort of got us together. And yeah, it was pretty cool because they said they wanted to do a narrative-based game, and some of the fun parts was getting tracking. So from my perspective, I was working on building an event system so that throughout the entire time that you're sitting there in the experience, I'm monitoring everything. So whether you're talking about the animations, they go through various events. So you've got the there's a crab, and when the crab gets off a rock, he starts walking, and so on and so forth. And as he hits different waypoints, it fires off an event. And similarly, when you look at stuff, it fires off other events. So what's particularly cool is the whole system sort of plays in together, so you can queue events that fire other events, and it's just dynamic storytelling, which is kind of fun, because we're doing things like there's one character, the Colossus himself, that as you look at various different events in the game world, if you look at various different things, we trigger things slightly differently. So there's this big dramatic first step the Colossus takes, and depending whether you're looking left or right, that's the side the foot comes down on. Similarly, other events are queued based on the person's experience. Certain audio, certain cues and things happen depending on what you're looking at. Yeah, it was a fun challenge. Lots of various finagling little things to do, but entertaining. It was a fun thing to work with, and
Cool.
it's fun working on a project with a lot of artists for a change, because I'm fairly usually stuck with developer art and developer assets. I don't really have the luxury of working with people who can really bring a project to life and sort of make my code more interesting by having it look pretty.
That's fantastic. I didn't actually realize that it was a narrative story based on, at least in part, user input. So that's an excellent use of the hardware. I think it's really unique.
Yeah. I don't think we telegraphed that well enough, and I think that's we're going to do a breakdown of after the fact of how it went for us. Like, it's actually, we've taken a couple of GIF images of our logs and such, and there's some really fun stuff going on. Like, I'm using a dot product calculation on the gaze detection, so I can detect the degree of angle towards looking at an object. So I can tell whether you can see something, can't see something, whether you're looking at it, or whether you're staring at it, so you have been looking at it for X number of seconds. And I can basically have an aim assist by tweaking what constitutes look at. A lot of standard VR experiences make the mistake of using raycasts. And the problem with that is it's a single dot point you have to hit off an object. And it's kind of, it's a bad idea for a VR experience, because what you're doing is you're limiting their vision to a single point that they have to hit their head on, and they don't realize it. But if you use something like a dot product gaze calculation, you're getting a degree of relationship to an object. So 1 is directly at it, and then 0.6 or 0.7 would be sort of me turning to about there. So the advantage I get is I can sort of tweak it to sort of say you can just about see it based on my estimation of you're looking at this direction. And we're doing a lot of other stuff too. We're calculating metrics on stuff like the average looked at items for the majority of the time. Have you looked at things or not looked at things? It's kind of a test run for some other projects we're working on later. But there's a lot of very interesting metric data going on in the background, and for example, things like subsequent queues are happening based on other events. So if you have looked at, let's see, what's a good one? There's rocks behind you, and if you look at the rocks, at the time when a footfall of the Colossus hits, the rocks will fall on that footfall. But if you don't, it'll wait 2 or 3 steps and then automatically fall based on those footstep count. So there's lots of stuff that happens very passively, and that's kind of what we wanted to experiment with. A lot of people kind of go with, let's make very interactive experiences and show lots of things changing colors, but we wanted to play with the idea that rather than you interacting with the world, let's see what it's like when the world interacts with you. Kind of tries to tweak itself so that you don't miss the action. You know, so the world doesn't.
That's brilliant.
It's a fun little experiment anyway. It was worth the try, and I was quite happy to be part of it.
I think that you should advertise that fact a little bit more, because I think a lot what would sell that is if people knew it was there, or at least a little bit had an idea. One of the things that makes Sightline such a good experience is the person at the beginning says, here's what you should do, and then sort of shows you how to do it. You don't really miss anything that way. But further to what you're saying, the type of metrics that you're talking about, I know we don't like to talk about, maybe commercial monetization, but at the same time, I work in advertising, or at least an extension of advertising in a sense. And what you're talking about is the type of metrics that people throw gobs of money at. Gaze detection is something that we use in digital signage as well, through Intel's AIM suite. So we do a lot of, if you're walking in a mall and you appear to be under 35 years of age and female, we might market hair products to you. And if you're not looking at the sign that detected your face, maybe we'll put it on the sign that you're going to walk to later. So in VR, there's like potential that is unbelievable here for the ability to have a captive audience. So when you're in VR, there's absolutely no distractions, as everybody knows. So imagine being able to actually show someone something and have them pay attention. I don't know about you guys. I don't see banner ads on websites anymore. They don't exist for me. But make that advertisement something fun. You know, don't. I think people are smart, and you know, when you can do something as brilliant as you've done in a game, that ability to detect what someone has looked at and then script actions based on that. You can also gauge what works and what doesn't work, because people are going to be interested. If you find that someone is interested in a particular object, or at least their gaze tends to go to one particular object, then you can script events around that. You can even predict it.
Yeah, like that's precisely what we're aiming for, because one thing that we noticed, it's such a small thing, but it's amazing what comes out of playtesting, is we have this sort of the character walks towards you, and then there's this kind of a roaring sound behind you, so the Colossus makes a noise, and then depending, as I said, when you turn left or right, the foot comes down that side, but 85% or more of playtesters turn left. Everybody turns left, and it's just nothing, we have any idea why, but it's very interesting that it's particularly whatever way we've set up the scene geometry, whatever way the experience works, people turn left, and it was just a very interesting little metric. And regarding kind of focused objects,
I think I turned to the right.
Yeah, see, it's
I feel
interesting.
like the character was looking that way for me. I don't know.
Are you left-handed?
No, he is.
I am, yeah.
We forgot to mention that you're part of the Left-Handed VR podcast.
I am part of the Left-Handed VR podcast. So shout out to Bob, who's out there at the moment in the wars in SVVR, and Matt, who's currently getting on the Unity bandwagon, which is kind of cool. He's officially becoming a Unity dev like myself.
Yeah, I've been seeing him throwing out all kinds of knowledge and whatnot in some of our chat groups. So I was like, oh, is Matt actually into all that? Cool.
Yeah, it's fun having someone to tutor through the basics of it that I went through when I was learning Unity.
Right.
But the gaze queue stuff. One thing in particular that I have toyed around with as an idea I'm really looking forward to, because I'm working on a game next with Nick called Echo Red. We kind of teased it a while ago, but we've not really shown any content. It's going to be a fun one. There's going to be a lot of gaze detection based stuff in that, and one of the
Yeah, tell us about that.
Okay, Echo Red is basically us trying to marry two things we've not really seen done in VR, which is pure interaction is one. I'm a firm believer that I think we're missing the gameplay portion of the game in VR. There's a lot of experiences, which are nice, but they're very passive, and on the same breath, there's a lot of games which are games on a surface or kind of happening around you, or you're controlling a character, but there's very few where you're actually playing a game or you're involved in it. So we've been playing a lot with destructive environments and worlds that interact with you as well as you interacting with them, and trying to optimize the idea of motion input in a way, and at the same breath having the advantage of having an artist and a writer, and Nick with history of a background of film, we're trying to marry it with a narrative. So we haven't seen much in the way of narrative games come out of VR yet, and he's going to be working on AI characters that will move around the world, and my particular niche is powers.
Heck yeah.
I've been spending a lot of time in trying to optimize the best way to do things like telekinesis. Because it's very easy to watch a movie and watch a guy have telekinesis, but you never really question how does it work. How does he actively decide to pick up that object and put it over there? Where does he make the decision? How does he decide the direction and angles and such? So building a system to physically create something which is a conceptual idea you see in a movie when someone flicks their wrist is a very fun concept, and I really want to kind of empower the player to have complete control and not just press a button but actively decide every aspect of how they play. So yeah, that's what we're working on. Hopefully it'll be pretty good. We'll be giving more teaser information in the next month, I'd say.
I think that's fantastic. One of the things of being in an environment like this is when you're surrounded with a power, or you have a power, or there is some sort of even something as simple as a shader effect appearing in front of you. You can it's much more immersive. The sense of being underwater in VR is 1,000 times more impressive than being underwater in a game. And for years and years, we've done the same thing with, the echoey sound chamber type sounds and the 5.1 audio and rumbling bass and different things that you would experience underwater or in different environments, like the crackling of ice, that sort of thing. But all that is enhanced, and I think that maybe we haven't even thought of how would we visually represent that, little things that you would miss on a flat screen, you don't miss with 3 dimensions.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely the way we're thinking too, because there's so much scope for that. I mean, one of my personal favorite concepts is the idea of tailoring experiences to blatant interest. So the example I used when I was kind of pitching it to people is, picture you're sitting on a boat, and the boat is just going across the water, and there's 3 elements in front of you. There's a small island to the left with a small village on it. There's a big rocky mountain with a castle way off to your right, and there's sort of a cave in front of you. And as you sit there, it takes about a minute for the boat to reach its destination. And you're just casually looking around, you're kind of wandering, you'll look at the village and wonder what's over there, and you'll peek over at the castle and then see what's over there, and you look back over to the cave, then you're more curious about the castle, so you look back at the castle, and you kind of sit there for a while, and then all of a sudden you notice the boat is moored by the castle. Why? Because it's the thing you've looked at the most. It was the most interesting to you, the thing which clearly you never selected it, there was no menu, you didn't need to. Your general demeanor, you were more curious about pondering what happens over there. So having a world which is slightly skewed to aim towards what you're going for, it doesn't need to telegraph, it doesn't need to be a big deal, because you'll probably visit all the places anyway, but it just generally tries to choose what you want. And say there's a war or a fight going on, there's an item you need to pick up, or a weapon or a prize or something. And the items that you pick up are dependent on the things you've been staring at the most on the walls in the rooms you go to. So there's a lot of scope for that kind of thing.
Oh, you could even do scripted narratives that work with that. That's fantastic. Thinking about what the way that you've come off, just casually chatting with you now, is that you're definitely thinking ahead in that way, and these are concepts in gaming that I don't think people have really considered, because we didn't really have gaze detection before. I mean, sure, you could point your mouse at something, but it's often more advantageous to have your characters somewhat not glancing everywhere around, because maybe you have to shoot the thing that's going to be coming down the hallway in front of you. So you don't have that luxury, but in VR you have the ability to aim somewhere and look somewhere else. So you can take a lot more from that.
Yeah, totally. Like
and you don't have to use just auditory cues, right? You can use right. It's 1 degree, and now we have another 6.
But with gaze, when you're looking at it, you know that. Yeah.
Especially being able to get that information.
Going further on that, I want to introduce another person at the table here, VR Fanboy, who I plucked out of the audience to come join us up here. VR Fanboy, I know you're an enthusiast and you hang out here in VR chat, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, lately I've just been working on computers to pay the bills,
Sure.
Mostly for friends and family, because I'm kind of out of a job right now. So I've been really interested in looking into Unity. Sadly, I'm not good at it.
Well, this is a good place to get help with that. I mean, use Unity, put something here in VR chat. You get a lot of support from the people here. That's what we encourage and recommend a lot. So
the longest journey begins with a single step.
Yeah, and not having a job right now sounds to be like the perfect time. I sort of wish I didn't have a job right now, so I could learn.
It does give you a lot of free time. I'm really interested in your concept of using gaze detection. Seems like everybody's been waiting to come up with gameplay until the interface has been sorted out. So with a VIVE or controller or keyboard or whatever it's going to be. Do you think, have you been looking at the FOVE and how that might in fact impact your games?
Oh, I love the idea. I'm kind of disappointed that Oculus haven't gone that way, or that Valve haven't gone that way either. And unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of being able to buy every piece of hardware that's come out. I'm having to branch out the other way instead. I'm getting a neuron. I'm going to play with the concept of body language and matching that to the eye tracking. But could see if there's anything else we can do with that. But it's so much scope of interesting stuff. I mean, the one that really interests me as an idea is, imagine, say, The Lion King, and you have a lion in front of you, and there's kind of this dramatic scene, and there's a fight going on, and some hyenas are attacking, and you're staring at the lion right in front of you, and there's a hyena coming from the right and a hyena coming from the left. The one on the right is more brazen, and he's going to be sort of scrappy, and the one on the left is more sort of serious, and the way he fights is different. So what you do is, if you watch the guy on the right, if he's the one who interests you the most, when he finally gets to the lion, he will leap and they'll have a big dramatic fight, and then the one on the right will have a few swipes. But if you start watching the guy on the left, he's more interesting to you. He might come over and parry very slowly and have a whole different fight. But if you're staring down the character in the center, both hyenas would jump at the same time. You're telling the same story, the same events happen, but the story basically picks up on what interests you and plays it slightly differently. And if we can add body language of sort of shrugging and general gestures of leaning in for interest as a standard one, or leaning back when you're relaxed, arms crossed is a classic one for stress or protectiveness. You can really gauge a lot of subtle cues which could augment a narrative.
Hey, Tom.
Very interesting. So I wanted to talk about SVVR. It's been basically SVVR is what's been going on the last 2 days, and such a highlight with a lot of things we already talked about, FOVE and whatnot, are things that were highlighted there. I did notice before you started that Everyday Pop was popped in here, and would love it if you'd come down and join us since you attended SVVR. It'd be great to get some first-hand information. What do you think, G?
He's like running across the room to get to his
Jason, I
mic.
think you put him to sleep. So, hopefully later we'll be able to grab him to, he's been taking
There we go.
1,600 pictures. Hey, that mic is working.
I wanted to ask, how do you see audio cues affecting the gaze detection? Because you can make people look at things with this 3D audio that they have now.
Yeah, well, we've been kind of colloquially phrasing those as IOIs, indicators of interest. We basically cue them, so you'd have different things which would flicker or sound cues or anything else that could kind of nudge someone's perception in the right direction. I'm a major fan of audio in games. I think it's massively underused. The first songs I ever learned to play on the keyboard was the Zelda soundtracks. I can play all of them because it's so memorable, and I really hope to someday imbue that same level of nostalgia into whatever I create.
Hey, D. Oh, I'm looking at the chat, and no, we can't hear you. You know, I had this problem. This latest build is having some issues. And I had the, if you just log out and back in, I think you'll be all right. It'd be great to get him his opinions. So, SVVR, much bigger conference expo than last year. Last year was about 400 people, and this year is about 1,400 in attendance, so that's pretty awesome. Much bigger venue. I forget the name of the actual center they were at. Wish we could have made it. Love hanging out with a lot of our friends out there, of course. Many of us wish we could have made it. And I did do some streaming in VR chat. I had like 7 hours yesterday streaming the videos and VRCasters.com in here, and it was great. I mean, we hung out and talked for hours amongst a bunch of other people. It was a great time. I'm going to try to do more stuff like that in the future. But first I wanted to kind of get into the VIVE, basically, and maybe get into OpenVR. I heard Joe Ludwig talking about OpenVR and mentioned that there's no requirements or restrictions to it, that you don't have to distribute on Steam to use it, and that Lighthouse systems are working with it, and that it supports VIVE, it supports DK1, DK2, and will support consumer, Rift, and plus OSVR. So apparently it's an API, and I want to get your opinions on that, and we'll start with Lhun.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I was actually really hoping you'd ask me this because I just spend a lot of time thinking about it. What a lot of people don't realize is that VR HMDs don't have a standard yet for programming for them. So there's going to be tons and tons of HMDs, and everyone's going to want to make one. There's already all kinds of copycat HMDs showing up on, if you have your advertisements turned on Facebook, you start scrolling down, you'll see all these, Android-based HMDs coming out of China that are already trying to hit the market, already trying to be first. Now, the problem is this is going to happen a lot, and both Razer, well, not Razer, but actually Sensix, and and using Razer as a hardware distribution platform, and then Valve later, once they had their famous separation from Oculus, was that there is not a standard for programming HMD input like there is for gamepads. So if you have a direct input gamepad, you can emulate a Xbox One controller, and it works with pretty much every game on the planet. And they all work the same. They all have the same inputs, and all you have to do is say joy left.
Hey, we hear you.
Hello.
What? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Come back here.
Welcome.
They told me to go back there, but I'm ignoring them.
I don't know who's telling you that, but
Some people by the entrance.
Dude, I tried.
oh, we can't hear them, which is good.
That's okay.
So, anyway, further to my point, you can say joy left. Any game programmer anyone who's done that, they know what
Actually,
that does.
hold on one second. Them talking out there, it doesn't work because Kirito and you guys in the back can hear them. So, Kirito, can you ask them to politely not talk over there?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Thank you. Right on.
Yeah, they can, guys. Yeah, they can.
Okay. So, yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
No worries. So, so we don't have an input standard yet. But OSVR wanted to do the same exact thing for OSVR wanted to do the same exact thing. I don't think they knew that Valve's OpenVR would be the same set of standards. But both companies are doing this separately, or at least were, and didn't realize that that one or the other was doing the same thing. So essentially, the guys over at OSVR, I sat down with them in Converge, and I think I asked the lion's share of questions. But essentially, what they're building is a programming API that you can do things like me hands left, or me/head, or /me/foot. So it doesn't matter what your input device is, and it's not OSVR programming the support for the devices, it's the company manufacturers that are building the HMDs. So it's an abstraction layer, and essentially what it'll allow programmers like aPieceOfFruit to do, and everyone else out there, will be very easily write a game and not have to worry about coding for the HMD they're building specifically. I mean, that's really important, because people building games don't want to have to think about, how do I get this HMD working, and have to deal with Oculus's SDK and have to write around that, and then what do I do for the VIVE? Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. And the same is true with OpenVR. Whether or not, I think people will flock to Valve because they trust Valve. Valve has released a lot of software, they have a very stable platform, and people will flock to Valve. OSVR started doing this, Valve, because they trust Valve do this, but they've been working on it for a very long time. And this is the great problem with VR, is nobody knew how to code for it, and if you're working with one specific piece of hardware, you've got a Betamax, or you have an HD DVD, right?
I love this topic. In fact, it's up on my website, fruitvr.com, and with the rest of the guys on Team Metatron, we had this thought quite a while ago. Our plan was, we were calling it VRVU, and that's exactly what you said. It's a service stack. It's a layer of abstraction for input devices. But the problem we found very quickly is you've got device fragmentation. It's one thing abstracting a layer of input when you're talking about, say, magnetic for hand tracking versus optical. That doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you still end up with a quaternion value. But the problem lies in the fact of when you've got different resolutions of tracking. How do you create a system which can say hand right, when in one system you'd only have rotational values, while in another system you'll have 6 depth of freedom? It's very hard to understand what device sequences you'd have, and our work was trying to figure out how you could either approximate one to the other, or how you could figure out a way to use multiple devices that will equate to the same level of input resolution. But it's a really tough problem, because you're either expecting your consumer to have an awful lot of external devices that can equate to the same thing, and then you'd have to make some sort of database or a dictionary of this plus this equates to this,
Precisely.
and so on, and it's a lot of work. Or you work the lowest common denominator, and that's far worse. I don't want to live in a world where it just supports the lowest service stack solution. I know Raylos, his particular interest on this, he's written an article quite a while ago on the same topic, and his solution is to emulate the alternatives. So if you've only got keyboard and mouse, you still create a system whereby you convert that to an animation, which will then equate to the motion of moving forward. So you press A and it performs the gesture, which equates to the same thing as someone having leaned forward. And you try to basically bridge the gap by, if you don't have full positional tracking, you allow it to appear that way to the API, and the game then develops to that standard. It's a very tough fragmented problem until we have some level of absolute baseline standards which are fully functional.
Right.
I mean,
so
there are
Windows, they have
examples of
some-
this.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I was just
No,
gonna
please go.
say in Elite Dangerous, there are examples like you can turn your head using the mouse, and that's built-in functionality, and that's a case of emulating with another device.
Absolutely. And in Windows we have something called the hardware input device, so the HID stack, and that's essentially what OSVR and OpenVR from Valve are doing. So if you build it, they will come. So that's what they've done. So rather than trying to build a universal catch-all, or making game programmers have to work with the API for Oculus, for example, they've simply built this abstraction layer and said, okay, here is our standards. Here's what we're going to have for the game itself, and it's an API to snap into whatever programming language you might be using, and they allow the hardware manufacturers to say what the tolerances are. So just like at a vehicle, like a car, you have a potentiometer, and that will be throttle all the way down and throttle all the way up. And everyone understands that if they put their foot to the floor in a car, it's going to go at maximum possible acceleration, but that's going to be a lot different in a Pinto versus a Viper. So, but the input is still the same. You're going to put your foot to the floor, right? So in a VR headset with 120 degrees of view and a VR headset with 90 degrees of view, you may still have to turn your head all the way, but at least the hardware input device knows what those tolerances are, and then the game itself is what makes the change. But then the game programmer doesn't have to think about any of that. They just say, me, head, or, look left, that sort of
And that seems to work a little bit easier than the input situation, where you might have, a glove, some sort of, motion with your hands. You might have a gamepad or some other device. So, I think, Jason, what you're bringing up, that when you said like certain things might have rotation and not, I mean, that does sound pretty challenging. I was listening to Oliver talk about this on one of the input panels, and he definitely said that there should be some level of abstraction, that you should be thinking about the event or action first, and then deciding based on what inputs are available how you're going to present that.
Oh, exactly. Like I think I'm well known for being a bit of a stickler for design principles in programming. I'm a bit of a fan of everything design patterny and architectural, because my background is in business tier programming, specifically business process management and workflow systems and rule engines and all the other stuff, which is how do you design a system that's modular and can grow and build. So one of the first things I did when I saw Unity as an engine to play with was I was a bit appalled by the fact that everything was very hard-coded. You're using public variables for things. Your input system is input dot whatever, and it's the standard Unity input. And the problem is, if you go and buy an asset like the rewired input system, or if you go and buy C input or something, you have to delete all your references, go through every script you've referenced and put this stuff in. So one of the first things I did was create a service stack, which is it's a global system where I can register services and they'll cache a local instance and I can pull them apart. So one example is an input system. When it comes to input, regardless of whether you're talking about a Hydra or you're talking about keyboard and mouse or whatever else, I traditionally boil it down to the usuals. You've got interact 1, interact 2, menu, and back. I mean, regardless of whether you're talking about a mobile phone game, you're most likely going to have two interactions, whether they're taps or double taps, or whether you're talking about gamepads A and B. You can safely provide that functionality, and then you can create action-based events to say when player presses grab, do something. And if your device doesn't support 3 buttons, you can then map a double tap or whatever else. And I use this system to sort of use a mile to make like fist gestures and such to act as the equivalencies of button presses in the little experiences and games I was playing with, and it was very simple to abstract that layer out and play with those things. And I've done the same with gaze detection and such. Like it doesn't matter whether you're talking about it. For example, pointing. I've played with the Hydra, so you can point at something and select it, and you're doing effectively like raycast or dot product checks or whatever else off your hand. But what's cool is it doesn't matter what your source and target objects are, because if you place it in your head, you've got head tracking. You place it in your hand, you've got hand tracking. If you can abstract out the layer of what your targets are, it should be fine. But yeah, it's a lot of these systems don't have this in place, and the real frustration is getting people used to it as well, because there's a certain level of design thought that goes into this stuff, and a lot of people are used to a more scripted approach, or a lot of game engines use visual editors, and thinking in terms of an abstraction stack is going to be hard to get a lot of people used to. So that there's other barriers as well as the physical, the code aspects, but there's also getting the mentality to change, to think of things as the lowest abstraction layer as you can.
No, I agree, and I think maybe it's the old hand game programmers that are going to have a little bit more trouble with this. But I think people who are coming into it new, especially with VR being something new, it won't be that bad. I think it's really up to the hardware manufacturers to make sure that their devices will work with whatever ends up being the most popular thing. What's interesting about OpenVR and OSVR is that OSVR recognized this from the beginning. A lot of people don't have faith in Razer, but I actually do, because they build that their job, what they do in general, is build game peripherals. They build gamepads, they build mice, they build controllers. And if you have a Thrustmaster Elite or a Logitech G27, every racing game on the planet works with both of those devices, but they're both racing wheels, and those game companies didn't build the ability to utilize those racing wheels, well, in the most part, on their own. They got the programming SDK from Logitech and from Thrustmaster and from Mad Catz and all these other companies, and they just plugged it in. And then they just abstracted it. They did all that work themselves. I think this goes one step further. By providing the abstraction layer to the programmer, they don't have to think about that anymore. And then, like in Ready Player One, we're going to have varying levels of immersion based on how good your hardware is going to be, but the simulations will be accessible to everyone.
So before, I want to give Everyday a chance to jump in here. I know that you posted about OSVR earlier. Lhun, you actually put some comments out there. Tell us what you think about all of this OSVR, open VR stuff.
I mean, I think the OSVR, there's a very distinct difference between the OSVR, like the abstraction layer and the library and the tools, the software tools, versus this particular HMD that Sensix and Razer built and that they presented at SVVR. And simply put, having an abstraction layer that goes across devices is a good idea. Everybody knows this. This particular dev kit that Sensix has built is trash. It's terrible. Maybe this demo unit was just severely damaged or had a lot of problems, but it was this is the first time I've ever put on an HMD and then took it off almost right away because it was so bad.
Now, you can't say that you've never had that happen with a DK2. Let's say you've misconfigured a DK2, tossed it on, and you notice that everything is judder. You immediately jump out.
No, judder, I played Wind Waker at 30 frames a second and had judder 100% of the time. And I was like, this kind of sucks, but it's all right. But
right.
And I've played Dishonored in Vorpex, running a frame rate of 15 frames a second, and done that for hours at a time. But this was there was no head tracking in the entry splash screens at all. One of the devices, the head tracking was just broken and didn't work. And the lane, as soon as I got head tracking on the one device it worked on, and I got to the menu where it was actually working, and then I had this latency that was at least 300 milliseconds, possibly higher, and I was getting 5 frames as I looked left and right, and there's nothing redeeming about this particular piece of hardware.
As a hardware guy, I would say that probably was the PC. There's no way. Essentially, an HMD is three things, and we all know this. It's a low latency monitor. it's optics. There is a adjustment driver that makes sure that the screen itself, or the adjustment of the screen, matches whatever curvature of the optics itself. And then of course there's the input and head tracking.
Right.
So none of those things though can influence the frame rate. None of them. That it's all up to the PCs. So I have a feeling that there was probably a lot wrong with not only probably the USB input itself, the head tracking itself, and the device, maybe the people presenting it.
Yeah, there's probably setup problems, probably configuration problems, probably software problems, probably, and there are probably also some hardware issues, like the fact that the lens adjustment was very difficult and error prone. The fact
Right.
that the open design led to the screen being really dirty and having giant pieces of dirt on it, and they weren't
Yeah.
cleaning it. I just feel like, I guess it just doesn't give me any confidence that this dev kit they're building is going to be useful if they go to a trade show and they have no attention to making it remotely playable or usable.
Do you know if it was the people from Sensix that were there, or was it just a group of volunteers that were doing it for them? Or
I have no way. I didn't ask them.
Did you talk
I
to
can
them
tell you
outside?
they were interviewing people after they tried it, so that tells you something.
Were you able to express, your experience, and did they have anything to say about that? Like, did they have any defensive, oh, well, this is
No,
causing
I
the
just
problem, or blah, blah, blah?
I decided, yeah, I just decided not to waste any more time with it. I left. I told them the
Sure.
latency was terrible, and I left.
that's interesting because we've had people like Tested, for example, use the device, and they most of them exclaimed that it was unremarkable in a good way. That it felt very similar to the experience within at least the DK2, and this is a very early dev kit. Now they've rocketed through, being completely unknown to being, here's this HMD that we slapped together basically. And there's a few things that a lot of people don't really know about, and because they're not advertising and they're not writing about it, because I think they're deep in code at the moment. The thing with the HDK is it really is designed as a hacker dev kit. It's also designed to be, $199 and an affordable piece of kit. But as you've said, the version that you have certainly is not the final version. So the version that will go out in July will have IR-based positional tracking. It will have a leap motion sensor built right into it, and so behind the main lens, and it will have a screen between the IPD adjustment panels that won't let any of the dust in and that sort of thing. So those things are certainly going to be in the final version. That's something that they've stated. From the beginning, this is something that we're going to do. And the HMD is that the first version, like the OSVR branded HMD, really is not designed for consumers either. It's just like the DK2. It's really designed to show, here's an affordable headset that you can start coding things on OSVR platform, but you don't have to use this headset. You can use a DK2, and that's fine too. Or you can use a CV1 if you want, or you can use a VIVE. The best part about all of those devices is that this standard allows you to code it for all of them, across all of them. But I think they're just trying to get more headsets into the market because there's only about 200,000 of them that have been sold, and in North America, so we've got 100,000.
Pretty poor on them, though, to go to the trade show and have this experience. I mean, you'd think that would be a priority for them, and yeah, that does turn people off or make people lose faith. So it seems like
No,
a huge mistake.
I absolutely agree with that. There's no doubt in my mind. And I agree with you as well. When it comes to that, when you're presenting a product that you're trying to, now see, everybody looks at it as they're trying to sell the headset, but they're not really trying to sell the headset. That, I guess that's the difference. But at the same time, they are trying to sell their brand of universal input API, and computer hardware is very important for that, and making sure that you have a good presentation is very important for that, because people are going to look at you as a hardware vendor first, and then the software vendor second, because the average consumer does not see all the ones and zeros behind the scenes that make building VR experiences so important, and that is really 90% of it. And I'm so glad we're starting to see software now.
Even for developers, though, I think it's going to be a hard sell. As someone who's used the SixSense SDK, working with sliders, who's used the Mayo SDK when working with that, I've used the Oculus one, I've used the Steam VR for getting my Oculus running. Some of them are just a delight to work with, and others are an absolute nightmare. And I was so pleased with the Steam VR SDK. It just
Mhm.
functioned perfectly. It did exactly what I wanted to, and it just gave me so much confidence in their ability to produce something.
And it was heavily used at the VIVE Jam as well. And everyone at the VIVE Jam was dev testing on DK2s, and it just kind of just worked. They took it up like they would have to go upstairs and test on the Vive. And they would find out things like, oh, I don't have the height of my character quite right, and things like that. But they didn't. They only had to go up there like occasionally, which is good.
I like that.
I'm certainly sold on that prospect. I mean, I was so happy with, especially the integration with Unity. It was so flawless, and it had some subtle benefits of being able to render both to my screen and to my HMD during testing, so I could see it. I could place a second camera in my scene that would be sort of a third-person perspective camera, and I could render to both without any messing. So I'd have a really nice view of the scene as well as the first-person perspective, and kind of get a gist of what's happening. Like, especially if you're using gaze cues, you're effectively triggering things behind you based on events. And if you can't see them, because they're literally not supposed to be seen because of triggers. So putting a camera in the scene and be able to watch both was quite nice, and play with experiences that allows me to show somebody a camera that experiences the scene differently than the person who's playing in first person was really, really nice. And that was just right there. I didn't have to change any settings. It just instantly worked. And I didn't have that luxury with the Oculus one. I had nightmares trying to, anytime I tried to change it, to swap it out. And even with an abstraction layer, the DLLs would have issues where they'd compile or stuff wouldn't. It was just a nightmare. And I'm certainly on board for the Steam one. I think personally, unless I'm proved otherwise, something else comes along.
No, I agree with you entirely, and you hear that, devs, and I think this is very important. I'm going to parrot what you're saying, and I think that every dev working right now should probably pick one, at least one level of abstraction layer, and start working with it. People, up until maybe this week, because of SVVR, didn't really realize that for the last 5 months, you could code for the DK2 using OpenVR. Because the whole Steam VR universe is not going to be limited to the Vive. It's not going to be limited to Steam itself. It's not going to be limited to the Lighthouse, totally passive tracking system. But it allows you to use your DK2, and it just gives you a really nice abstraction layer. And then if someone else comes along with a different piece of kit for HMD, and they want to play your game, then you don't have to port it from Android to PC. You don't have to port it from PC. Whatever platform you're on, doesn't matter what HMD they're using.
But I have a question then to the room, as it's one thing that worries me about this prospect is, in a way, I partially believe that the problem with this is it's slightly akin to using sort of injection drivers. It's a standard level which is going to make things hard to tailor your experience or kind of augmenting a game to make it work for VR. Because the problem is, what about using a headset which is eye tracking, or a headset which has an inbuilt hand tracker on the front, or one uses some sort of pass-through camera? If you're using an abstraction layer, you don't know this, and you have to go and actually check or do some sort of...
I mean, the way these things usually work is there's, they have capabilities, and you can use the standard stuff for like your motion and your standard like image warping and all that, and you can just check, like for the portion of your app that uses eye tracking, you can say if it has eye tracking capability, get that information here, do stuff with it. If it doesn't, do something else, and
right.
Seems like it'd be fine.
I would say you work your way down the ability queue, right? Because you can play every racing game on the planet with a keyboard and mouse, but it's awful, right? and you want to use a steering wheel. You're going to have such a much better experience with force feedback in the steering wheel. But you can do the same thing with gaze tracking. So if you've got eye tracking in something like the FOVE, you got eye tracking, then you can go that far. But if you don't have eye tracking, you can at least have gaze tracking. And if you have gaze tracking, or if you don't have gaze tracking, then maybe you go to right joystick control or cursor-based control, or you give the character a cursor. So you can almost have a tree of here's the level of input sources. Here's what I want from my game for the absolute best or the most ideal experience with the hardware that I hope most people will use, and then you can work your way down.
But it varies. So if you're using eye tracking for input, that's one thing. If you're using it for passive data collection, then obviously there's no substitute for it.
Right. But then that's where you decide what your requirements.
it's less about the semantics of how you implement it. I'm familiar with those. What I mean is, do you believe it'll set a standard where people, akin to making mobile games and then porting them back up the DK2 and the like, or making games for the Gear, do you think people will target their game for the common service stack as opposed to even bother implementing a feature set which will include eye tracking or something, because there's no need to if they're aiming for global appeal?
Well,
You know,
the
like
situation's
games
even
locked
worse.
frame stretch
Right,
and such.
right now the situation's even worse because right now, if you want to make an eye tracking application that uses eye tracking in some good way, you pretty much just you target FOVE, and then nobody on DK2 or anything else, which is 99% of people, can enjoy your experience in any capacity. And what you really want is you want to say, I'm making this cool thing, and if you happen to have eye tracking, you get this really cool additional functionality that you can try. And then everybody tries out your thing, and people say, oh, I wish I had that eye tracking so I could try that feature, but I don't have it.
Right, and I think that that's what we're doing now. I think that's where we are now with VR. We're at this point where we're trying to gauge interest in what the highest common denominator of basic input devices is going to be, what the refresh rate and people's system performance is going to be, and it's no coincidence that the 290 and the 970 were selected as your recommended hardware, because this is what the majority of early adopters have. And this data is available all over the place because Steam's hardware survey is out there, and so you can find out, here's what people are using. Okay, so I want to target the people who went out and bought Grand Theft Auto 5 on day one. You can look at what their hardware was at that time, and you can say, okay, so these people are in general going to have a 780 or a 290 or a 970 and above, and we need at least this to make sure that we have our experience good, and then you actually tailor your hardware to that, which is kind of converse to what you'd have, but I don't believe at all that AMD and NVIDIA are not in the loop, and there's a ton of stuff that AMD is doing that I think is being driven by what Oculus and Valve are saying to them. I can continue if you want to segue into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight, and I think that this works because we're talking about input devices in general, is that both AMD and NVIDIA many months ago announced VR-specific technology, and a lot of people didn't really kind of, what does this mean? You've got Liquid VR, you've got all these different things that AMD is working on, and all these things that NVIDIA is working on. Nobody really kind of understood what that really meant or why that would be important, because nobody really nobody knows what
the part, but I didn't
right.
hear about AMD.
So AMD probably has 5 times the investment into VR that NVIDIA does, and it doesn't seem that way on the surface because you don't really see it, because they don't release this information. They're releasing it to developers right now. They're releasing it to some marketing agencies, so a lot of it's fluff, and you got to kind of dig through it. But I think AMD is poised because of what they did with Mantle, and what they're doing with high bandwidth memory. So all of their goals right now are around getting more information to your graphics processor before it causes latency. And there's no other application except VR where that's really important. Because when you're talking about a two-dimensional monitor, you just have to get as many frames as possible on the screen, and maybe a high level of detail, but you're all working in 1080p. So why does it matter how many frames per second you're getting? And G-Sync and FreeSync came out around the same time, but then this is when HMDs were starting to get interesting. These guys really have the front line because they're driving what the final release of the CV1 HMD is going to be. So their display hardware targets are going to match what's going to come out around the Christmas season. So AMD has 4 things that they're doing right now. They have Liquid VR. They have latest data latch, which is extremely interesting. And then they have direct display attach as well. So these are all technologies that only make sense in VR. So you've got latest data latch. This is a very interesting piece of high-level code that is designed to read the state of input devices in real time. So right now you've got your game, and you've got you want to see where the player's mouse is, and you get that information or get what the player is doing. And it's like sending an email to the CPU is sending an email to the GPU and saying, hey, okay, my player just did this. And so the GPU reads it and says, okay, the player did this, and then it presents that on the screen. And it's very quick, especially with mouse movement. But this is different. This is like a QR code that is constantly updated in the background that the GPU is then looking at when it needs it, but not when it's presented to it. So it's a very interesting piece of technology, and obviously it's very hush-hush. Everything's closed source for them, and they don't really say exactly how they're doing it, and it's all copyrighted and in dark corners of the internet. And we may never actually see how well it works until we are in a game that is optimized for this, and we're blown away by it. The best part about all this technology that's coming out with Windows 10 and from NVIDIA and from AMD at the same time is it's all passive. All this stuff is going to enhance our gaming experiences, and nobody's going to appreciate it, in my opinion. But at the same time, it's going to make everything faster and more fluid and less laggy with less latency. And it's just going to work across the board, even in old games, and everyone's going to get the benefit without having to code specifically for it. A lot of people think that their game is going to have to be DirectX 12 to reap the benefits from DirectX 12, but it's not DirectX 12 that makes Windows 10 and all this new technology so interesting. It's this brilliant bit of coding that they've been doing on the low level to make your graphics card more bare metal, more console-like. Mantle was the first step in this direction, which is why Mantle could do amazing things, but Mantle was proprietary and you had to code for Mantle. Windows 10 is Mantle on steroids. DirectX 12 is Mantle all the time.
Can you explain Mantle?
I'm saying Mantle, but it's Vulkan. Vulkan and DirectX 12, the things that they're doing, they're the same code. I mean, they pretend it isn't, but it really is the same code. It's the ability for the CPU to use every core to access the texture pipeline simultaneously, and this is not something we could do before. In 2006, Microsoft went to then ATI and NVIDIA and said, we have this wonderful thing. We're calling it Windows Display Driver Model 2.0. We really want you to use it. It's going to make everything really, really fast. And if you Google WDDM 2.0 ATI NVIDIA, you will find a document from 2006, a PDF document or a PPT document from 2006, where Microsoft was saying, geez, guys, you should really use this technology, but I'm sorry, you're going to have to rewrite your graphics drivers from scratch. It's 2015, they're finally doing it.
Very interesting. Any questions for Lhun on that, or VR fanboy? Both me and you are just taking this stuff in. Do you have any questions or anything coming to mind, like what does that mean? Or anything you want to add?
No, I'm pretty much up on it. It's the problem with the input is it's got to start somewhere. We need a base, and I think that's the hand controllers that are tracked. We all want more, but we got to have something. And as for Windows 10 and Vulkan and all that, yay! Windows has always been dragging things down.
Well, the funny thing is it's actually not Microsoft. It's the problem is you don't want to alienate a group of people. You never want to do that. You want to make games for the hardware that everybody has at home so that you can actually sell games. Otherwise, nobody's going to play them. And there's all kinds of really cool stuff for super high-level hardware that nobody has. And that's always been a thing. And there's always been high-level, next-level stuff. But and everybody's amazed by it. I mean, look at what Square Enix did at Microsoft's Jam. They had this incredible bit of real-time rendering technology, but it required 3 Titan X's, and nobody has that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's part of why it's so nice Oculus put out those recommended specs, because if devs feel like they can depend on that, they can start leveraging a lot of the technology that they know is in 970, 980, and the higher end AMD cards, and they'll be able to get a lot more performance for less cost.
But it's all been about optimization lately, and that's been fantastic. So people are getting very smart with the software end of things to make the hardware better, and that's exciting to me. It's very exciting to me because it's just being written better. The fact that you can write a driver that gives you 60% performance boost is unreal.
So there are 2 features I'm very excited about that NVIDIA coming down the pipe on NVIDIA. I don't know if AMD is doing similar things. One of them is obviously asynchronous time warp, which Gear VR has proven. to be extremely useful. Like, there are Gear VR apps that run at 30 frames a second all the time, and they're perfectly playable, and asynchronous time warp is just pulling them up. And the other one, of course, is VRSLI.
Yeah, exactly, and AMD is doing the same thing. So AMD has a bit of technology that is going to allow you to crossfire two machines, and with direct display input, you'll have each eye will be running on a separate video card if you want. So this will allow you to use two cheaper video cards simultaneously and get all the frames rendered on the left eye and all the frames rendered on the right eye on two different cards. So that's fantastic. They're both doing something with time warp as well. AMD is working on a piece of technology working with time warp, which is part of their latest data latch. So they use latest data latch to get the current state, and then they use time warp to figure out where it should be at the right time, and then that's when you've got your very, very good persistence. I think they're both coming out with stuff. I think AMD is going to surprise everybody because of HBM and the fact that it's 5 times as fast as GDDR5, but I think they might be saying a little hush about it because, you know, the 390 is not out yet, and they don't want NVIDIA to punch them in the gut like they did 2 years ago. So it's that's one downside, is that competition can sometimes stifle innovation, but at the same time competition will also, well, necessity will bring innovation up. I think we're seeing that right now with all the video cards that are coming out and all this technology that we're gaining, even for people who are still playing on 2D monitors. All this performance benefits that they're getting are being driven by necessity in VR.
So there's one thing that worries me a bit about these advancements, which is the time warp's still brand new technology, and it's still being advanced, as the 0.6 SDK demonstrated with the added support for real-time positional time warp. And what I'm afraid of is I'm afraid that NVIDIA and AMD are going to put async time warp into their drivers and their stack, and it's going to work pretty well, but then whenever Oculus or whoever wants to improve time warp or do something new with it, or do a new similar technology, that there'll be no way to incorporate that or to add it, so that basically you'll be stuck with either using the async time warp that NVIDIA gave you and is never going to update, or you can use Oculus's, which won't be properly async.
Right. Now you've hit the nail on the head, and that's why all the implementation of time warp itself is actually done on a software level. But that's the same reason why they're making these video cards more bare metal, so to speak. So more direct PCI Express access, more direct from the kernel access. It's so that you can have these sorts of things without any sort of latency. I think that's the main reason why. Time warp is the last step for both NVIDIA's graphics display timeline. So if you look at here's how the graphics card at a snail's pace displays a frame on the screen. Time warp in VR is always the last step, and the same is true for AMD. So it doesn't matter if time warp changes. They're building things that will work on a number of concepts to reduce latency that can work with things other than time warp. I'm sure they've certainly thought of that because they didn't write time warp itself into the code of the video card. The types of things that they're like in the hardware itself, or they didn't write a subroutine into the chip either. So one of the things that they've done is that they've built technology on that is at least useful in other things. So I think, no matter what you're into, you're going to see some benefit from that.
But I mean, is it going to be locked down in the official driver someplace,
No.
in the innards of it, or is it going to be
No.
something that can be customized?
No. So the asynchronous part of time warp is you can think of asynchronous as one piece of hardware abstraction, and time warp being what's provided at the end, and the same thing with latest data latch and then time warp. So there are two sides of the same thing. So it's the same technology. They call it something different. They probably go about it a different way. Whoever does it better, the other one will emulate.
So which do you think we should buy for the next generation cards, AMD or NVIDIA?
That's a very good question. I think it depends on what the 390 series looks like.
Yeah,
So-
I'm getting a sense of an AMD fan here from you.
Well,
I
actually,
think
I'm
that's
not.
leaning.
It's interesting because I'm not, but I've weighed both sides of the technologies. I'm actually more of a NVIDIA fan because of the stability and compatibility that comes from it. So on a base level, I prefer NVIDIA because it tends to be really, really stable. AMD, on the other hand, has always been really pioneering, so they have a tendency to come up with stuff that really, really works. Crossfire worked better than SLI always, but their drivers were never as good. But AMD, for example, is the company that brought us 64-bit computing. Intel's AMD for end-user PCs is licensed, Intel's x64 computing for consumer-level PCs is licensed from AMD.
Yeah, honestly, like, whenever people ask me that, I just give them the most pragmatic answer, which is Oculus test all their stuff on GTX 980s. And, I mean, I know that they're going to do, before they launch, obviously, they're going to test their SDK heavily on a variety of hardware, but I feel safer knowing that I'm using the hardware that every engineer at Oculus has on their desk. It's just that stuff's getting run more often on that platform. There's going to be less filing reports with them when something weird doesn't work on a particular configuration.
No, I agree. NVIDIA tends to release information, though, when they've got something done. AMD, on the other hand, tends to be a little bit more human in the fact that they'll sometimes kind of leak information out. And that brings me to my second point. AMD released information about latest data latch and multi-screen Crossfire and all the technology that, like Liquid VR and everything that goes into that, well before anyone announced that any HMD would be dual screen. So what did they know before we did? And that's interesting to me. So I wonder, in fact, if AMD is working with Valve, because they came out with this technology that was specific for dual screen, dual display, but not single screen HMDs. Which is really interesting, and it makes me wonder where they got that information from, because Oculus hadn't announced anything yet.
Well, the Valve room had a dual screen display.
Yeah, but at the time when this documentation went out, AMD or Valve had said that we're not making our own HMD, we're just playing with one.
That is interesting. They might have a backroom connection.
All right.
I think that's
So that's a lot about that. Is there any other, things to talk about that before we move on to another topic? I'm still going to be digesting that for another day or two, I think. What about Oculus? The CV1 specs we've gotten. I think it was i5, 8 gigs of RAM. I don't think it was a recommended 980, was it? I think it was something less than that.
970.
Yeah, I think it was 70.
Yeah, and I think they've determined that you can build this machine out for, like, what was it, $600, $800, something reasonable.
Oh wow.
Right around 800. Yeah, I looked at it quite a bit.
And
Which
that's
is
the
coincidence.
current
That's
prices?
the average price of a Steam machine. What they anticipate as well. So.
Is that the anticipated price then, or is that basically what it would cost now to build that?
I think that's right now.
I'll be interested to see if they add a VR spec Steam machine to their offerings, and if they sort of partner to get very specifically branded to be used with the headset Steam machines as opposed to sort of the general gaming rigs.
I think they'd be silly not to.
I've talked to some people who are already thinking about, like, speccing out like a retail package that's just like an Oculus Rift box, and it comes with all the software and all the hardware and your headset, and it's all in a big bundle. And we could be seeing those at under $1,000 price point at launch.
Oh, very easily, I think. But again, both Oculus and HTC and anyone else building a headset right now is targeting the enthusiast market for Christmas. So they're going to be targeting people who probably already have the hardware, or at least were going to buy the hardware or have something close. I mean, I had the specs exactly. I feel like I'm their case study when it comes to that sort of thing. Like my level of user, my type of user.
Yeah, they probably literally broke into your house and, like, opened your computer.
But no, I can tell you that everyone else that I've ever built a computer for, I recommend the same level of hardware. You have to have at least 8 gigs of RAM. You have to have at least an i5. You probably have a 970 or a 290, whatever's cheaper at the time. and everything else is good. Every game will run
Yeah.
absolutely fine. And it seems
I-
like
I
that
have,
early adopter market.
I'm exactly the same. I have the same stats. I have the 970. I have an i5, but I have a slightly older i5. But aside from that,
Yeah.
it's the same. It's the exact same spec.
I'm running a
same RAM,
6-year-old
you know.
CPU, and it's so much less important now. So
And
Yeah.
I mean, I have 980s. The only reason I do is because I do recording and all that stuff, and that adds overhead, and so I just wanted some headroom. But like, if I were a normal gamer, I wouldn't have 980s.
you're
970
gonna
is
love it. You might be able to sell one of yours when DirectX 10 is out. I've played a lot with the Xbox controlling console, or the Xbox inside Windows 10, and its on-screen recording and latent recording is almost completely transparent. You don't see any lag or degradation in quality or anything. It just doesn't affect your gameplay experience in any way, which is really good.
very cool.
I'm actually loving Windows 10 as well. I mean, it's just gone strength to strength. Because every so often they have a little bit of glitches when the updates they release, but I've found it such a comfortable experience.
I agree. I've
to
never used my
behave.
Oculus Rift in Windows 7 or Windows 8.1. From the day I had it, it's been Windows 10.
How important do you think SSDs are right now for VR?
SSDs are massively important for computing.
I think they're vital in computing in general. I think.
I
they're
mean, so
fundamental.
we should clarify here that SSDs, the main thing they'll affect is your load time, and your load time affects your VR experience about the same way it affects your monitor gaming experience. It's not something that's going to make you more sick. It's not something. It's going to make you impatient. It's going to make you wait, and that's all it is. It's not special.
Right, but it's one less thing that can cause judder, right? It's one less thing. So if your system is spending a ton of time doing I/O traffic between your way slower SATA bus and trying to get that information to the graphics card, you have to load the textures. If you run out of RAM, you're going to be paging back and forth. But having an SSD makes that experience a lot smoother.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That if you swap, you want to be swapping to an SSD because that'll be blocking your process and actually just dropping frames.
Yeah, and generally I find that it's separate from the whole VR aspect. Just SSDs are the greatest perceived increase in computer speed. A lot of what people attribute to slowness in a computer represents boot times and stuff, or apps loading. It's not actually. So a lot of people buy more RAM and they kind of go, why doesn't it feel faster? But yeah, it's all these other silly little. But when you put an SSD in your machine, it instantly just, because everything starts opening instantaneously, it starts to feel like your computer is just moved a generation up.
Yes, I run SSDs all the time for everything. In fact, I actually have a drive made from 2 striped SSDs together. It has like a gigabyte of throughput per second of throughput.
Are you me, and what did you do with me? I'm running a pair of OCZs in RAID 0 right now.
Awesome.
It's funny that you actually said that, because you just asked him if he was you, and then in that other post I saw you comment on Jason's office space and said, "Are you me?" Because you have a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah. So that was your desk. Yeah, we have.
That was me in my triple monitor setup that I showed you.
Yeah, I've got there's a photo floating around somewhere with both the G27s, 5 monitors, an Oculus Rift, a bunch of other stuff sitting on the desk. Me, man.
And the monitor companies have to be worried about these HMDs replacing, 6 monitor setups.
It's brilliant.
I mean, when 4K monitors come around, though, maybe 4K, maybe the next one, but it's going to. We're going to get to the point where you have virtual monitors that are as good as your 1080p monitor that you might have on your desk now. And by then we'll have 4K or 6K monitors on our desk, but for a lot of people, like, having that little bit of extra detail and sharpness is just not going to justify that cost, that space, and that inflexibility compared to the virtual monitors.
What I think a lot of people miss, though, is if you have 2 monitors in front of you, you're looking at your left monitor and you're seeing 1080p fidelity. Then you have to turn your head and look at the right monitor and you're seeing 1080p fidelity. But in VR, I'm looking at Gunter in 1080p fidelity, and now I'm looking at you in 1080p fidelity. I've got 2 monitors, but I have 360 degrees of monitors in 1080p, because I can only look at 1 or 2 places at once. And that's the brilliance of it. I really cannot wait until Virtual Desktop supports virtual monitors as well. And I've got a couple of headless ghosts here that have abused that functionality with in virtual
Honestly,
desktop.
yeah, I've wanted to try the headless ghost thing, actually. I've never tried that. One thing I'd actually want to see in virtual desktop in the future, if they can pull it off, would just be, I just want one monitor, and I just want that monitor to be a sphere, and it completely surrounds me on all sides, and I can put my windows anywhere I want on it, and then like it's basically completely filling your environment with monitor.
Right, but that's
Yeah,
just
I
it.
like that. That's pretty cool.
Well, that's just it. Whatever you're looking at in an HMD is presented to you in 1080p. Your field of view is only as big as a human can see, and so I think we're going to hit this point of like retinal fidelity where it's as good as it's got to be. And then there really is no difference between having a physical monitor except for price. And if you need a workspace with 35 monitors because you're NASA, then you just slap on your HMD. And
But you see,
you
I
those
think
monitors in front of you.
I think that's the multi-monitor solution is it's a band-aid in the first place. I think the reason we need multiple monitors is because there's never been a way to present the level of information we want to in a space with which we can access it, and there's no way to indicate desired content. If we live in a world where you've got spatial information and eye tracking, we should be able to contextually present information in a way that completely removes all the need for multiple monitors around you.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think the
that's the next
reason,
level.
the reason we have multiple monitors, one is that it's for increased field of view. Obviously, headsets have that problem fixed, and the other reason is just because we like space. We're more productive if we can spatially organize things over a larger area, because there's like obviously the less you're switching between things, the less you're overlapping things, the more you can organize things with less state changes. And like you're saying, I think that when we have that full sphere on which we can organize things, that gives us complete spatial flexibility, or even a space in which we can move between different setups and remember them. There was actually a great talk at SVVR today by someone who does research, and they talked about the importance of spatial organization for how we think about things and how we navigate UIs. And I think that for our productivity apps in VR, it's going to be really exploiting that human sense to remember, like, oh, my window setup for this particular working task is over here, and I have everything. I have these on the left, I have these on the right.
Yeah.
These are below my eye level, and you just remember all that stuff there is, and you can glance right at it.
And the best part is being able to change that environment, and because you have that memory of where those things are, just like from going from room to room, you know where your cutlery drawer is in the kitchen, and you also know where your socks drawer is in your bedroom. And so maybe you have a desktop environment that's designed specifically for gaming that is, a crazy gaming environment where you've got, it looks like maybe retro arcade or something like that. And then, for work, you have a calming environment designed for work. But you can do that, and we could go back to the Dewey Decimal System for cards for organizing our files, but at the same time, and we evolved that, for finding our library books in the library because it was the most efficient way to sort them. And I think that we're going to start going back to some of those concepts in three-dimensional space rather than working in two-dimensional space like we have on Windows, because we've been staring in flatland for the last 10 years.
Plus, there's the advantage of differentiating between passive versus active content, because there's a lot of content that you're switching between that's effectively passive. You're looking at your emails, you're looking at your music player to change tracks. That's where I use triple monitors, but I use them 90% of the time. I have my central one for my work, and on my right I put my unit tests, and on my left I have my email and my chat and my music controls. And it's purely passive. So I can look at my periphery and notice when I get a new email, or notice when I want to change a track. I can just slide the mouse off screen. But I'm only actively focusing on one thing at a time. So having the ability to spatialize your information so that the entire world is contextual and has all these graphs and charts and information you need, but doesn't interfere with your ability to focus on the content in front of you, is fantastic. And that's my.
And when you pull in eye tracking, you can do so much more with the passive consumption. Like, say you have a music player, it's just like a little thumbnail, and it just shows like a little music note. And if you want to know what song is playing, you look over at it. It pops up the song name. It pops up the controls. You can change things, and then you go back to what you were doing.
I think it's really interesting, too, because you could never really conceptualize how far the rabbit hole goes with this. In the news recently, Google's chief search engine engineer was moved to their VR team. So what does that mean? Maybe we've got, the person who's conceptualized the idea of Google Now. I don't know if you guys have ever used Google Now, but like on a Friday night, on my way home, it's telling me where the movie theater is. It's telling me, the restaurant that I like to go to. I didn't tell it
it's
that I was
freakishly
doing
smart.
that.
It's kind of disturbing.
Right, but now imagine being able to take gaze interaction and combine that with the information that Google already knows about what you do on a daily basis. Now you've got a interactive user interface that not only knows a bit about your personality, but also knows what you're looking at and what you're interested in on top of that. I think we're going to have interactive systems where they're entirely passive and give us what we want without us ever having to tell it.
But here's one of the problems with that, though, which is I've played a lot with data viz and the concept of how do you use the spatialization of VR to interact with data more efficiently. And just take the concept of I have an Excel document, I have a database. How do I use VR to get the most out of the mental association I'm trying to make with that? And you realize that a lot of the flaws is that data isn't as visual as we need it to be. Like if you take, I tried to make a file browser. I connected to the Search Everything SDK. It gave me all the files on my computer, and I could do a lot of really nice things with Unity and visualize them spatially. But the problem is, they're just files, and they don't. The metadata that we currently have on a per file basis is what you can figure out the creation date. You can figure out a bunch of other, names, small details. But we live in a world where you have to scan the file to get content out of it. Why are we not storing a scanned archive of more detailed information? Thumbnails, basic keyword searches have a lot of pre-computed data equivalent to password rainbow tables, something that's huge, that takes up 10 terabytes at the back of your hard drive, which is pre-computed metadata on your entire system. And then when we go to visualize it, we get this absolutely gorgeous amount of information for a developer to use to visually spatialize your information in such a way that you can start to make passive connections. Like me displaying every file on my computer as text on a wall in front of me is mostly useless. I do get to make mental associations when I see certain words passively, and your brain does some really clever stuff with that, which is very surprising. But for the most part, finding what you're looking for doesn't improve much by having VR, having extra information, because we don't have the fidelity of metadata that we need.
Right. And I think it goes even further. Being able to again abstract what it is you're looking at, and then being able to put that in sort of a real world or a VR type example. We're starting to see that. I mean, that's part of the reasons why Titans of Space is such an impressively moving demo, because you can physically see in a scale that is 1-to-1, so to speak, how big this unbelievably massive celestial object is. You don't really get it until you're sitting in front of it, but literally. And I think that you could present file sizes in sort of the same way, or other things of that nature.
And I mean, you have to. There's a lot of metadata that's more semantic and useful that does need to be extracted, but it can be cached, and you can do a lot of things around visualization that I think would be really interesting. And yeah, I think it's a good idea, but it's difficult because you never want to present all the metadata, but you want to present the bits that are relevant to the thing you're doing right now, and that's very contextual, and it's also contextual kind of how they're presented, and because you might want particularly important attributes to be presented in a more prominent fashion, so all those kind of things.
Yeah, well, one thing I thought would be really interesting is what about the concept of abstracting out your metadata in such a way where it's subconscious in how you perceive it. So you decide how do you visualize the concept of sales data for some product? What if it was a park you're sitting in, and birds would represent consumers, and then based on the sizes of flocks, that represents distributed markets between your age groups and your targets, and then the number of birds flying around, you can get a very vague gesture of how popular something is, depending on what they're flocking to most, and the world in general could be darker or lighter depending on how positive or negative that data is in terms of what you're trying to display. So you don't even have to go through the idea of trying to, how do I find a correlation of my data? How do I come up with a useful metric? When I can sit down in a world and I can instantly get a subconscious sense that this world is dark and gloomy, and there's less birds here and more birds here. The general sense, you can get 500 different filters worth of information instantly, and then you can drill down and get your submetrics when it's relevant. That's
A picture
really
is worth 1,000 words, right?
Exactly.
And that's just it. No, that's actually a brilliant idea. I mean, imagine, see, a lot of people don't really get, like, what does Gangnam Style, how many hits does Gangnam Style have? Well, we have this massive number that nobody can really conceptualize. But imagine if you could see the amount of YouTube hits that you get on your video as a crowd in front of you. What would a stage with every person who's ever watched Gangnam Style look like compared to a stage of every person who's ever watched, like, some abstract video on PewDiePie's channel? Right? Would that be absolutely massive? And that would be so interesting to see visually in that way. It also would give you a massive sense of scale of the audience that you're reaching. You know, people say that, okay, well, you know, there's not a lot of HMDs out there, but Oculus has sold 200,000 units. This room feels really full looking around at the people that are here now, and there's only 19, 20 of us here. What would 200,000 people look like?
A lot more.
A lot like the crowd at the Super Bowl.
So
we would
imagine
need a
the
stadium.
Super Bowl
We need a
cheering.
bigger set.
You need 2 stadiums. Now imagine 2 stadiums of people cheering for this technology. When people say that VR isn't going to catch on, you know, just think of it that way.
Yeah, like I like to say this actually. Like I think venture capitalists, if the Oculus Rift only sells like 500,000 units, they're gonna say it was a failure. But it's like, honestly, as far as I'm concerned, the Rift is already a success. Like, they've already sold hundreds of thousands of units. There's already enough customers for developers to earn money, to have a niche market, and to be getting great feedback. And I don't think it has to be a spectacular launch. I think a spectacular launch is going to help a lot to make it into a big market that will attract the interest of strong investors and people with lots of money who want to develop quality content. But at the end of the day, even if it's a complete failure, we've already started the revolution, and it's just from here. It's just a matter of we can snowball quickly or we can snowball slowly, but we're going to climb the curve.
No, I agree. And it's funny too, because when you look at game releases, 250,000 sold units is considered a massive success in most markets. I mean, try to get 250,000 people to stand in one room. Like, that's the population of a city, and that's massive.
Well, the games industry is unfortunately gotten to the stage where it makes a horrible example for gauging numbers and metrics and worth. We got to the stage now where the concept of what constitutes a successful game is ludicrous for AAA industries. Like, there's many flaws with the way things are dealt with there. But yeah, it's insane. Like, it's definitely already a success. It truly is, and it's kind of inseminated into the public consciousness more than anything else. The fact that people I know who don't understand anything about computers at all are informing me about the latest news on VR headset because it's made it into their sphere of understanding and their culture, which is interesting.
Yeah, for every person that has a VR headset, I can show you 10 that want one.
Yeah, like you just get out a headset you get out Gear VR on a plane, you're gonna get some person being like, "Hey, is that the Oculus Rift or what is that? Can I play with it?" And everyone has heard about it. Everyone knows about these things. They want to check them out.
Yeah, I still chuckle from time to time when I'm out in a bar talking to some people, and someone kind of goes, we'll just bring up some random topics. What do you do? I said, I work working currently in games and specifically for VR. I said, whoa, are you telling me you have an Oculus Rift? I said, yeah, I do. Like, there's something like wide-eyed awe of somebody who, realistically, I didn't even mention VR. I didn't mention the Oculus Rift. I specifically used the vague, anachronistic, just VR phrase because at least then it's somewhat understandable. But people were able to quote me hardware names, and they're able to talk about some of the issues that are kind of, as I said, inseminating the public consciousness, which is really, really interesting for people that realistically wouldn't care. The same people I mentioned VR when I first got into it a year and a bit ago And I was like, oh, I have this headset. What is it? And I have to kind of explain every aspect in detail. But it's gotten to the point now where it's just known by everybody. It really, really is.
Yeah,
And the amazing thing is Oculus is, yeah, I was just going to say the amazing thing is Oculus is just deliberately not marketing it. Like, they are doing their best not to tell anybody about the Rift. And despite that, it is extremely widely known.
Well,
I think
because the
people
user
talking
impact
about
is huge.
Vive coming out by Christmas time and how if Oculus isn't doing that and that's a mistake, Vive's gonna eat it up or something. And I just don't believe that. I think I don't think that many people are going to be ready and poised by Christmas to buy that. I mean, you also have to have that computer that costs a lot of money. I don't think that device is really something that Christmas matters so much. I think people are going to be getting that will get it after Christmas. What I think is going to be great is if it comes out then more buzz. More people are going to start getting exposed to VR at that moment. More people will get it shared with them, and then within the next quarter or two, all of those people are going to hear about it and they'll pick up Vive or they'll pick up the Rift, or at that point it really doesn't matter. It's just they're not all going to be there at Christmas. I think it's really going to be the flock after that.
Yeah.
Well, what content is there going to be for the Vive at Christmas? Developers will have had the Vive for less than 6 months.
Oh, there'll be
Yeah.
loads. I'd say there's loads. I would put money down now. There's a pile of developers that you've never heard of who are knee deep in a game.
I mean, there'll be loads, but like Alchemy right now is building Job Simulator. It's gonna have like 10 levels. It's probably gonna have a couple hours of playtime. Like, that's the kind of thing we're talking about, like max. We're gonna see a lot of small games, a lot of kind of indie style games, and maybe some first party games that are pretty short. Maybe like even demos. Because the time frame just does not really allow them to build out a full-scale title that has 20 or 40 hours of gameplay. And I think that's all they can hope to do with a reasonable level of quality at this time.
What
Yeah,
about
that's
Valve
true.
themselves? Could they be working on something and launch something large at that time?
Well, we know there's some companies that are working on VR now that we didn't know were working on VR before. The other thing, too, is that absolutely every single experience that you are using now or have used in the past is 100% compatible with the Vive thanks to OpenVR. So it's a matter of changing the SDK that you're using to render the IPD. Everything else is already there.
Yeah, that's the fundamental thing that I think a lot of people misinterpret when they're not a developer. A lot of people talk about it, you need to make your game for VR, and it's a true asterisk. We all agree that you can't port an existing title, you're just going to have a million problems. But a lot of people don't realize we're not actually talking about the SDK or the physical requirements to get your game working with a device. We're talking about the semantics of design and how you actually structure a user interface and how you structure how do you control locomotion. The physical aspect of getting your game on device X and device Y, that's relatively child's play.
That's like seconds.
Yeah, exactly. It's not an issue at all. So I certainly don't see that being an issue. I think that there's the disparity and the market segregation that we have now will fizzle out mostly once some of the leaders hit the mainstream. Some of the other ones will fall out, and whatever ones are left, they'll end up merging and amalgamating until you've got pretty much the same hardware. And it becomes a question of do you have A, B, or C because of probably exclusives. And we'll live in another generation of equivalent.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the VR Jam is a great example of this because, like, immediately after the VR Jam, everybody who built anything that was like remotely interesting just immediately ported it to DK2, and it took them, all of like a few minutes, and they might have, made some nice customizations while they were at it, but they didn't have to do that.
So maybe they added gamepad controller input or something.
Right. And so, I mean, porting the same thing to the Vive, it would be another, hour of work. It's not a big deal. And if that gives them access to another 100,000, another 500,000 customers, they'll do it, and it's well worth the effort. And so I think what we're going to see is cross-platform releases for everything that isn't exclusive.
That snowball of content is happening now. That snowball of content is happening. I think in the last 3 days, that snowball of content since the VR Jam has just been crazy. I've played with more new stuff this week than I did in the last month prior, so...
What worries me though is this exclusives though. That is definitely something that I'm very, very worried about because I am publicly not a fan of consoles. And I don't care about the actual act of playing a console, and I fully get the logic that it makes more sense that you want a simplified experience with a gamepad that's more sitting room comfortable. And that's perfectly logical and makes perfect sense. And yes, it is messier for me to emulate my stuff and get controllers working, whatever. But the raw problem for me isn't any of that. It's the market segregation. It's the fact that we live in a world where it's perfectly okay for developers and for studios to basically say, no, you effectively to play this game from a standing point, you have to spend $1,000 to get the hardware, to get the game itself, get all the content you need, and basically start off because there's a heavy buy-in. And how horrible will it be in a world where you own this headset and it has identical features to headset B, but there's a game that'll only play on headset A for no other reason than it's been bought and licensed to be an exclusive. And I really hope that the way everything's getting digital and the way streaming content is getting more popular, and we're living in a service-oriented, pay-for-services kind of world now, that we can slowly move out of this mentality and start seeing things as an open platform again, because it's ridiculous that we have to buy hardware that's locked to certain software.
So I'm less. I was just gonna say I'm less worried about this on PC than I am on a console, because realistically, if someone releases a VIVE exclusive, someone is going to make some kind of injector, some kind of hack, some kind of mod that is going to run it on the Rift, because a bunch of people have Rifts and don't want to buy a VIVE.
Well, everything that works on the Vive will work on the Rift. That is 100% guaranteed. If you want it to work on the Vive, it by default works on the Rift, because
unless you disable that functionality, which Valve could do if they want to push Vives with their first-party titles.
I could never see Valve doing that, because the whole reason why they separated it from Oculus in the first place, because they were kind of upset with the way that Facebook does its exclusivity and its walled garden app store and that sort of thing. So,
but see, as we're talking about exclusive, this comes back to what we said before about our service stack. As a person who's hoping to have a pseudo thing out for vaguely around November, aiming for the Vive, for that particular piece of content, it is our main focus is cleverly optimizing our game to use the input devices that are presented to us, to use the various cool tools available with the Vive input. So yes, well, it's semantically true that we can very easily port our game to multiple platforms. You're talking about a complete overhaul of input. You're talking about targeting a game to actually use the benefits and pros and cons of certain input devices. And that's not the same. That's going to be an issue where, what if there's a particular input system that comes out with headset A, B, and C, that, for example, something that vaguely resembles the Move controllers is what you use on the Morpheus. Maybe its configuration doesn't conform to a 4-button service stack solution. Maybe it's got some spinny wheel on it, which is a very different sort of approximation of a mouse wheel, which you don't have. Sure, you can emulate it. You can basically say spinning the touchpad equates to the same thing, but that's a fundamentally different experience. So it's very different, and that worries me. The idea that you will have gated content for more over than just the idea of the headset. It could be that you have to target a platform if input isn't actually come to a conclusion at some stage.
But, I mean, that's okay, right?
That's a design choice based on how you want your experience to be. And I think that's actually just fine. I think there's nothing wrong with that, because if you think that your experience would be much better, where the tactile input matches the visuals on the screen, or whatever other level of design reasoning that you might be doing for that sort of thing, I think it's actually perfectly fine. And I applaud that, because some of the best experiences on the Nintendo Wii made very interesting use of the input, and I think that made it all that much more stronger. A lot of those games did end up making it. I think a lot of different games did end up making it to other platforms as well, and then people emulate them later and that sort of thing, and that doesn't make them any less of a thing. And if you really want one input source in your game, I think it's perfectly fine to target one piece of hardware, because that's going to give you the experience that you want people to see, and that's fine. I think that's really fine. But for a lot of other games that are sort of formulaic, like even when we look around a VR chat here, and it's an avatar-based system with WASD movement and jumping, and things that you'd experience in every other game. Most people in here know how to do all of those things immediately, but don't necessarily know which key to press to do the voice chat, because that might be different here. And but the fundamentals of that, I think those types of games, that formulaic game, or whatever we figure out is the de facto first-person shooter of VR will be compatible with all those inputs. And I think that those types of games will definitely start to appear. And I think we'll have a lot of experiences that work that way. And then we're going to have experiences that are specific pieces of hardware as well, and that's okay too. One little cookie, I guess, in the side of this walled garden of maybe having to have a console for the Morpheus type content is that at least all of the technology behind every major console right now is being written by AMD. So everything that they do, towards VR for consoles will also be in their PC hardware for VR HMDs as well. So I mean, the PlayStation 4 is running on AMD, so at least we got that going for us. That some of the same things that might be learned or gained from the Morpheus headset will also be in particularly in PC HMDs. Hopefully, some of that translates over.
So, to move on a little bit, I was talking a little bit about the CV1 and whatnot, but apparently there's this event June 11th where Oculus may be sharing more about CV1's specs.
Or maybe showing CV1 even.
Or maybe showing. There's a slogan, "Step into the Rift." I think that sounds pretty cool. Maybe implies, moving around or walking, standing up.
It's a seated experience, Gunter. It's a seated experience.
Step with
Actually, they've
the rift.
confirmed it's they're supporting standing experiences. They've already confirmed that.
And
I
so
mean,
we're obviously
yeah,
waiting to hear
no.
about.
It was always a legal dodge to begin with.
That's going to be tough, man. It's going to be a really tough sell. I think it would be really cool if you could do both. Nintendo managed to do that, but it wasn't really like Nintendo marketed their Wii as a move around the living room with your family type thing, and then ended up being a lot of people sitting at the couch. But at the same time, you could get up and swing your sword around if you wanted to, and it worked just as good. So I think that maybe it'll be up to developers to come up with the way to abstract the seated experience or give the full immersive presence type feeling to people who do want to walk around their 15 by 15 custom built room.
I think it's the same as what you were saying earlier. I think it comes down to the actual experience treated like it's separate hardware. As far as I'm concerned, I intend to make a game that's a standing experience. If you're playing it seated, you can't play it seated. It's not. I'm not actively going to try and gate you from doing it. There's not going to be limitations, but it's just simply going to be impractical to the point you're just not going to do it. There's plenty of seated experiences if you want that. The game we're making is going to be a standing experience because we're going to optimize for a lot of really fun leaning in and
I have a
sitting
question.
around things. Sure.
Just about this event, does anybody know where it's at? It's apparently not, normal.
It's in San Francisco, right?
Yep, it said that, but is it at their home, their headquarters? Are they going to send?
I assume it's, well, they didn't say. It's probably at some kind of reserved, because they don't really have they have a new office in Menlo Park. But that's not in San Francisco proper, so that's probably not the place they mean. I'm guessing they're holding some kind of press conference at either in a park or in some kind of rented office space or little conference room, or I don't know.
It's kind of threw me. It's obviously not like an Oculus Connect or, is a press release considered an event? It's just kind of confusing.
I mean, it's prior to E3, so wait, is E3 being held in San Francisco?
I don't know.
I don't know. They might hold it. Yeah, it might be in. I was thinking it might be held in the if they have access to their expo space, they might do it there early when they're setting up, or I don't know. I'm just speculating.
And with the whole stepping in and being able to stand or walk around, is there something that would be useful to track, your feet?
So they haven't confirmed room scale. That has not been confirmed, and I would be surprised if they have it. I mean, Crescent Bay was a standing, all of their demos were standing experiences, but they were talking about a map that was a meter square that you could move around on. This was not room scale.
Plus,
Right,
I mean,
right.
they can't do that to developers. I mean, it's one thing with the Vive. They've got, this is what we've got. This is our input. You can see it. Sure, it's not out yet, and they're taking their time giving it to a lot of people, but at least they're fairly locked in what they're doing. I mean, it's so late in the game for Oculus to come out and suddenly throw some input at you because it's just unfair. I mean,
No,
games have
they
been
have
designed.
to. Oculus, I think there's an 80% chance Oculus is going to come out with hand tracking controllers and they're going to be in the box. And the reason I say this is they're officially supporting standing experiences. Standing experiences with a gamepad are stupid. And on top of that, they're facing two competitors, two very strong competitors who both have really good hand tracking. They can't just say, I mean, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb if they're the only ones who don't have those hand tracking.
Also,
Everybody forgets
it
that
could be
Oculus
optical,
bought
I
a company
imagine.
that does it.
Yeah,
As a
but
gamer, I can tell you-
that's major, prototypey experimental stuff. I doubt that's commercial ready to dump in compared to what they're planning. I picture that sitting on the cutting room floor for quite some time until they found a way to, because they've been so safe. That's Oculus's main thing. We're safe. We've been taking every step of this at such a slow pace to kind of optimize for. That's why they stuck to their guns so much with seated. I mean, the problem with input is they'd be going against their entire ethos up to this point. To just go, crap, we have to compete with our competitors. Let's grab some input, throw it in the box, and we'll figure out the stuff later. And I don't think that's their style. I think they're too inclined to do
Maybe
it
their
for
style
commercial.
changes.
I don't
Does
think
it
that's
make
their
sense?
style, but I think that they've been working on input under wraps internally for a long time. I think that they've been looking at hand tracking solutions. I think it's easy to integrate with their existing, like it's not a major shift. It's easy to, they've been doing positional tracking on their headset using a very specific technology that would easily or clearly extend in an obvious way to tracking hands. And it seems like that's the most obvious thing for them to do, and I can't imagine them just saying, like, having a big input announcement. This is our, like, they said they're going to announce something about input. I can't imagine their announcement's going to be, we made a gamepad and it's pretty nice. Like, that's, I don't know, maybe I'm just wishful thinking, but it's like Oculus does play it safe, but there comes a point where they have to say, if we're going down this road, this is the things we have to support that path. Seated experience, if they were still doing seated experience only, I would say sure, the gamepad, like, that's sufficient for most seated experiences, and it'll work fine. And it's not even safe to be messing with hand controllers at your desk, but like when these standing experiences, I feel like they're gonna have to announce them, and it's not too late. I mean, like, they only announced the Vive at all at the recent at GDC, and that gave like 6 to 8 months notice to get a bunch of games out from third-party
Right.
developers, and they can, if they say now that there's hand tracking, people can immediately start to integrate it, and it'll be like they have a year to do it. I think it'll be okay.
It's interesting.
I don't know.
too.
I think
The timeline of VR happened in a very strange way. So we had Palmer in his garage building these HMDs because he was sick of waiting, and Synexis and all these other companies that were building, like, for the defense department and all these other companies and medical use and GE and all these other companies were building HMDs for that kind of stuff. And a lot of us forget that VR has been a very real thing in industry and in design and in medical and in the defense department and NASA has been using VR for 10 years in a really good way. I mean, but it never had positional tracking. What brought VR to the masses was the ability to get this, like, otherworldly, 1-to-1 head turning ratio stuff. And that's really what made VR okay. And now we've got a market for it. And now we've got video cards that are good enough. And now we've got gamers who are on, and we have a market. Gaming is bigger than TV. Gaming is bigger than movies. Okay, so now we have a place to sell this. Palmer was just sick of waiting. That's really what pushed all of this. And then he was the guy that lit the fuse. So he was the only person doing anything with VR on, private forums and that sort of thing. And then, so the timing was right, and then the DK1 came out. Once that happened, nobody expected the hype train to blow through the station and explode everything on the way through. And Oculus enjoyed for some time relative exclusivity and the ability to innovate in a lot of ways on their own and come up with stuff. When Oculus purchased Facebook, or was purchased by Facebook, that blew the wind right out of their sails. And everybody stopped caring about VR for about 6 months. Because they're like, oh no, Facebook bought it, it's going to hell. And that was the general, like, community consensus. But it didn't mean the VR was dead. Everybody was just sort of like, ugh. They didn't know what to think, right? And it was at that point that the Gabe train decided to come blasting through as well. And then you've got a massive company who is wildly successful that doesn't make stupid decisions about hardware or what software they do, and they haven't made any mistakes when it comes to becoming a successful business, period. And they're on board. Then you've got Microsoft skunk working this crazy project, and then HoloLens comes out of nowhere. So now everybody knows that the people who know everything about the hardware and the technology and who have entire teams of hundreds and hundreds of people who are examining what people are interested in and where the next big thing is going to be, all those people that know before we do what is going to be the next big thing, that knew that the Xbox would be successful, that knew that the PlayStation 3 would be successful, the guys who are talking to directly the companies that are making the video games that people are buying in the tens of millions, those people have thrown massive amounts of money at VR, and that woke everybody else up.
But that's the thing, exactly, it's an arms race. I mean, I'm firm believer that if Palmer had never popped his head up, we would still have a HMD. It would just be another 4 years' time, and then Valve would come out with effectively what they already have. And what happened is Palmer basically forced their hand. They said, there's other guys are doing it before us, we better rush. And in them rushing and getting their content up and having input devices, you've now got the inverse happening, ironically, that now they're forcing Palmer's hand, and they're forcing Oculus to go catch up now, and it's basically, it's an arms race. And I think that if they do have a controller, if they do bring input out, it's a reactive measure. It's nothing that was on their timeline. It was nothing that was there anytime soon.
Oculus is now on the defensive. They're in the other corner. They've become the reactionary one because Valve, from the beginning, has said, no, we're going to put a stop to this walled garden approach. And John said the same thing when he was talking about Steam VR in general. He said, we do not want to be a closed platform. We want to make sure that everybody will be able to use VR regardless of the input hardware. You can make your own business model if you want to. We don't care. We're giving you all the technology behind these open base stations that presumably you could install in coffee shops, you could install in auditoriums, because they're completely passive. They have no input source. They're just blasting a bunch of lasers everywhere so that you can use your HMD. And it doesn't matter how many HMDs are connected to it, and it doesn't matter where they're coming from, and there's no information passing back and forth. So this particular device is so open, so ridiculously open, that it's making it so that they've literally blown a hole in the walled garden to make sure that there never will be one.
And not to mention the fact that it's actually completely irrelevant how many you have as well. You can, depending on your room scale, you just keep adding them. I mean, you do link them, you set your phase so they don't actually miss each other. But realistically, you can just keep adding them. So you can, it's massively scalable at the same breath. But yeah, that's the problem, right? Is that this isn't magicked up hardware. Valve didn't just pop this out of nowhere. They've been clearly R&Ding VR, including input, just under the covers for so long.
Well, because they knew that would be a successful. They knew it would be a successful visualization for the games that were going to be on their platform in general.
Exactly, and it's clearly it was going to happen. But that's the problem: is that their headset plus their input is the result of a lot of R&D, time, and planning. The Rift was an example of something that came out to using modern technology and then becoming something that had planned in R&D.
Yeah, it was a frustration-driven group, a blast of passion that Palmer did because he was sick of waiting.
But that's the problem. The input, if they do come out with input, it's going to be entirely tacked on. It's going to be whatever they can find from an external company and try to mash into this device they've got.
I agree and disagree. I agree insofar as I believe that if the VIVE didn't exist, Oculus would probably be shipping the Rift as a seed experience with the gamepad because it's the safest thing for them to do, and they didn't want to take any chances.
I think they would have
but
done that had nobody else come out with the alternative option. But you got to remember that Valve also pulled the VIVE from, or the VIVE from their as a reactionary measure to the fact that Oculus was purchased by Facebook. So
yeah,
that was their reactionary measure as well. I bet you it was the next day that Gabe and his team went hunting for hardware developers who had experience with 3D parallax. And I think that's why they landed on HTC. I have a feeling that they probably spoke to LG as well, because of those two companies, and we knew that Sony wouldn't play nice with them because Sony already had something in the works. But of the three companies that have any experience in 3D parallax, it's LG, Sony, and HTC. HTC, if you all remember, came out with a phone a few years ago called the HTC Evo 3D, and it was a cell phone with a 3D parallax screen that works just like the Nintendo 3DS, but you could take 1080p HD 3D videos on it. So AMD already knows quite a bit about 64mm IPD stuff, and I think that they were the logical choice. But I think that Valve already had all this technology because they were sharing it with Oculus, and then Oculus walked away with it and went to Facebook. Not that I'm saying it's a bad thing. I actually have a lot of respect for Oculus, no matter what, because they needed the capital and they needed a company that was going to be able to give them, real marketability. But at the same time, I can see where Valve is coming from, because I think that the libertarian philosophy that Valve has in general throughout the company sort of forced them to do this because they didn't want to see their world, their vision of what VR could be, shattered. I think it was more an emotional response than a fact that they thought they were going to lose money, because Valve stands to profit from all of this, regardless of.
yeah. Like honestly, if Valve had never entered the space, then we would still see like most of the Rift games would be selling on Steam anyway.
Sure.
And they would get lots of money from it. So this is not a cash grab.
No, it's not. This is a completely emotional response from Valve. I think this is because it what Oculus decided, the direction that Oculus decided to go was like old school corporatism, and that is completely against Valve's philosophies as a company.
I don't know. I'm such a cynic, but I actually think that Valve is, if anything, one of the most evil companies in the world, in a great way, because I love them for it. I think that they're an evil genius mastermind, and I think that all of this is just really good at playing well with the consumers. I mean, any company that can officially sell you DRM and make you ask for more is clearly insanely evil and geniuses. And
Well, no, but they're doing it in a way that nobody's hurt by. I agree in a way, and yeah, I agree. They're selling DRM and people like it.
They start with the DRM, and now they've brought in microtransactions through this idea of the cards and the hats and everything else. They're doing.
But they did kibosh when they did it wrong. You got to give them that.
Yeah, when they got enough backlash. Realistically, they would have pushed and they would have kept it going. They're pushing the boundaries, and they're fantastic as a company, and they're really interesting in what they're doing. But they're not champions of the games industry. They're not heroes. They're just
No, I never said that.
Best marketing region. They're the best marketers in the world, because they're basically playing. They're smart enough to listen to their consumers. That's all they're doing. It's the only thing that makes them different is that they actually listen when there's a backlash in the community. But aside from that, they're going to try every other underhand thing that every other company's going to do. They're trying to make money, and they'll try every angle that'll work until there's enough fight back that they'll stop, call back, and they'll push another angle. I really think they're just fantastically evil, and I don't think that they don't have any love for the community in that same way that people think they do. They did start out, they're gamers like everything else, but then companies become a company, and I really think that it's just pure evil genius.
I agree that Valve has plenty of evil in them, but I like the Vive is not something they had to do to make. I mean, if Vive has evil to it, I think the main evil to it is that if they do exclusive first party titles, they could really kind of just take over. And the fact that they're selling first, I think there's actually a real risk that Valve is going to say, hey, we're selling the Vive this Christmas, and we're selling Portal VR, and nobody buys a Rift anymore because they all have Vives already.
Well, that's the thing. That's why I think they did it. I think their motivation for releasing the Vive when they did was purely because we own PC gaming. Everybody knows this. We own it. We are the unified thing that everyone who games PC playthrough. Origin, I don't know what that is.
So actually, they want to keep the Oculus Store out of business, basically.
Effectively, they're trying to remain the same store, the main storefront. They thought if they didn't do it, there would be a VR storefront. And as games start to go that way, it wouldn't steal their entire market, but there'd be a segregated VR market and store. And sure, they'd integrate it and they'd add support, but it stops being the primary focus anymore. Why would you can put it onto the Steam store, but if there's a VR focused store that's publicly available when you put on your headset, that's the primary
inside
market.
that's the key.
And if there's exclusivity to that, and they're basically said you're not allowed to play on Steam if you're on our platform, then obviously, begrudgingly you'll go on that platform. So I don't think it was any other purpose than the fact that if they get out first, they can at least keep the viability of Steam as an alternate platform, and hopefully the main one, but as at least an alternate one, and they're not going to be undercut by a unified store that represents VR exclusively.
Yeah, no, I
point.
half agree. I absolutely agree with that, because they do want to stay the store, and that is totally the goal behind this. But they still would have been the store even if Oculus had been the company that went ahead and continued to be the hardware vendor. And I think that Valve has always benefited and it continues to benefit from other people coming out with awesome stuff, but them just being the easiest and most accessible way to publish it. But I think I still think that I'm sort of conflicted in the fact that because of what OpenVR is. The thing that's interesting about OpenVR though is that OpenVR itself is an open source. But they're allowing hardware vendors to write drivers into OpenVR. They call it open, and it's open to work with, and it is an open platform to develop on, but it itself is not open source. Whereas OSVR is. OSVR's code straight up is open source. That is open source. So you can take OSVR's code and extend it. But there's a massive number of hardware vendors right now putting their HMDs and their input devices into OSVR. Now, what's interesting is OSVR is also compatible with OpenVR because they announced that they were doing that. So you don't have to participate in what you're speaking of, that this evil, like, we are the storefront corporatism, because you could use OSVR as a proxy to OpenVR. Will that affect anything on the hardware level? Yeah, I don't know. That's still meant to be seen. I don't think it will. But the point is that you're given an option. OSVR, even if their HMD is awful and fails, the software's still out there, and it's open source, and it's already out there. To me, OSVR is the Linux of VR abstraction platforms for developers.
Well, I should have said that the alongside of my point that saying Valve is a big evil corporation, I should have mentioned that I'm on board for that, because I am a major buy-in in the concept of, not quite monopolization, not the right word, but as far as I'm concerned, a managed ecosystem is almost always going to give you a better solution. Well,
this is why we live in companies with government, or this is why we live in countries with the government, right?
Like, I think I live in the Microsoft ecosystem in general as a .NET developer. My 90% of my day job is I work in Visual Studio using, .NET as a development platform and releasing all of my content that way. And it is beautiful because it's designed for what it's for. All the tools integrate, and it's the most easily managed system in the world. But you use open source, and you basically have so much segregation. Android is a prime example of something where you've got so much fragmentation, not only from Android itself as an OS, not only from the level of the differentiation of devices, but even something as simple as Samsung putting their own front end as a home screen and modifying the way the menu systems work. It completely kind of goes against the point in general of being a unified platform. So I'm fully on board for the idea that I sold my soul to Google. I say this as a punchline a lot. I sold my soul to Google, and I'm thankful for it. It someday might bite me in the ass, and I'm cautious about what information I give to Google services, but my entire life is easier from the basis that I have Google Music, and I have Google Notes, and I have Google Drive, and everything integrates in such a way that I just stop having to think about it. So I want that. I do want someone to win. I actually don't want this to be a perfectly open back and forth platform. Personally, I want someone to be the champion on top of a pile of dead hardware, and someone to win and go, we're going to do it now, because they've proven they've done it through being the best, not because they pushed harder. If they can prove out of sheer being the best platform, they deserve their mantle, and they deserve to be able to be the ones to build the actual metaverse.
I don't know. I mean, is that what we want though? I mean, because we could we could just as easily have like a Coke Pepsi thing, where they're constantly like innovating and building off each other's triumphs, and that wouldn't necessarily be a bad outcome.
I think that's sort of happening now because people realize that if they don't get on board with whoever's winning at the time, they won't make any money. And they won't be able to do the thing that they want to do. Because, I mean, remember, companies are first driven by passion and then later by profit. And that's really what it comes down to. So I think that OSVR's move to be compatible with OpenVR was a masterstroke of anticipation, because they realized that, okay, Valve is this massive freight train because everybody loves Valve. Just like you said, they've sold their soul to Steam, and they're okay with that. And that's the interesting thing about it. So whatever Valve do, people is going to be on board, at least initially, or at least in spirit, or at least they're not going to really have anything bad to say no matter what they do. And
you say this in the wake of the mods controversy.
Right, exactly. I do say this in the wake of the mod controversy, but because they changed
their way
tack.
out that very easily. That's the
Right,
point.
they
They
did.
went, oh, sorry, that was hand wavy. We're back to normal. You all love us again. Done.
And they do,
long?
and everyone loves them again.
Easily forgiven. It's true.
That's because they've done very little of they've screwed up very little. They have screwed up, and their screw ups are colossal. But so is Microsoft, and so is Apple, and that's just it, right? So, but I think that OSVR and of course OpenVR, and this question was asked to me, well, why isn't anybody using OpenVR then instead of OSVR? Well, because they didn't know. The people working on OSVR were again very anticipatory. Being probably the oldest VR company in existence, they realized, hey, we need this abstraction layer so that people can easily start developing for VR, because developers drive the platform. This is why Android is more popular than Apple now. And 10 years ago or 5 years ago, nobody would say, oh yeah, Android is going to be way better than the Apple App Store. But the Apple App Store failed because it was a walled garden. Sorry,
but that's exactly right about the App Store. But let's abstract it out to the concept of a mobile phone. Back when we didn't have the Android platform, your phone was a cohesive system.
Right.
It functioned to perform the task it was supposed to do. Like, I now have officially ditched the concept of my smartphone. I set it onto that mode, which makes it black and white and becomes a text message and call machine again. I went and bought my old retro MP3 player again, so I now get the advantages of having 70 hours battery life to listen to music with on the go. And as for my smartwatch, I've ditched the Pebble, I've ditched the Moto Active, and I bought this one by Withings, which is an 8-month battery life and passively collects tracking data, which is all I ever wanted in the first place. So we live in a world now where smartphones do everything, but nothing properly. You don't have haptics anymore for your touchpad. It's this horrible, this amalgamated thing that nobody likes. Everyone agrees that a touchpad keyboard is horrible. The cameras have gotten strength to strength to the point that you've got such a good camera in your phone, you don't need to buy a camera anymore. So, but at the same breath, it eats all your battery. And then you've got all of these other features, and that's what happens. And I think that's the problem, is we're going to end up with that, and akin to Minecraft mods too. Minecraft as a game stopped innovating. Except it didn't have to. The mod community did it for them. And with the apps and stuff, we're going to end up with this. It'll do a billion things. VR will have a million different outlets and plugins and all these different stores, and you're going to get crapware. You're going to end up with the equivalency of all the app stores in the world, which are just full of shovelware and rubbish, and the actual quality content is minimal at best, and it's hard to find in the sea of everything else. I would sooner have a cohesive, limited system, which everything has been engineered with the quality in mind of people like Valve, who have been sitting there and who have over-engineered and gone through focus testing. And there's a reason every game that Valve that comes out with, everyone loves. They love Portal, they love Left 4 Dead, every single game they've made, because it's been tested and produced to a quality which is insane. And you'll get the odd gem, you'll get the odd indie title, or like Minecraft and the like, which are made just purely at spec. But the sea of the amount of block clone bullshit that's out there now to counter that one good gem, it makes me sick. And I never look at looking at all these indie titles anymore. And I used to love the process of looking through indie games and finding a cool little game on some website. But that's been ruined for me. And I don't game on phones anymore because of the same issue. And I don't want to live in a world where where do I go for my social VR experience? Which one of the 50 different VR spaces do I go to?
This is just Sturgeon's law. Like, 90% of everything is crap, and it's always going to be. And there's no way around that, because most people aren't very good at what they do, and a few people are really good. And that's how it is with writing. It's how it is with music. It's how it is with everything. And if you and I certainly I have no problem with Valve saying we're going to make first party titles and they're going to be high quality, but Valve's not going to lock down Steam and stop people from selling crappy VR games on Steam, and Oculus isn't going to lock down. I mean, Oculus isn't going to prevent you from running games that aren't on the Oculus store, even if they've rejected them. And they're probably going to accept some games that are pretty crappy, and it's just going to keep being that way. We're going to have lots and lots of crappy VR apps, but
People vote with their wallets anyway, though. That's the point, right?
yeah, they'll vote with their wallet, and they'll vote with their ratings. You'll be able to find quality content, and there'll be articles on it. There'll be reviews of it. I know when great games come out, like when the City Skylines came out, I knew about it because every fucking YouTuber was talking about it. They were all playing it. There were reviews of it. It was everywhere. It was being recommended on Extra Credits, and it's you know when a great game comes out because
everyone's talking about Five Nights at Freddy's 1, 2, 5 as well. And
right.
Is that
No, I
the
would
same
agree
here?
that I think that social media will help us find the things that we want because we have this massive social media explosion of connectivity between everyone. And so we can sort of gauge, from Twitter and from other things and hashtags flying everywhere where we can see what people are really, really interested in. And marketing companies, of course, will find a way to exploit that as well. But that being said, we also find ways to push back. But I think what's interesting is that when you were getting up to your point, when you were rambling on initially, and I'm not saying it's rambling, but it was when you were no, but what I'm saying is when you were saying about how I've gone away from my smartphone and I've gone back to my MP3 player. And you know what's happened there is what you actually described is exactly what will happen. Is that you have taken the base aspects of this thing that was everything. This device that tried a million things at once, and it tried 1,000 different facets because they wanted to see what would stick. And you have whittled it down to what really, really matters to you as a consumer, and you've got the devices that are the best for you, that do all the things that you want them to do and nothing more, but the best that they can. And I think that's really where we're at with it. So Minecraft is a unique example in that it being the original, in a sense, was able to exceed all of its followers. But that isn't true for pretty much everything else we've ever done. So if we look at Half-Life 2 and we really, really whittle it down, what is it? Okay, so it's a story-driven first-person shooter. A very well-written story-driven first-person shooter, but Half-Life 2 didn't reinvent the wheel. It's still based on the shoulders of Quake and Doom and Duke Nukem 3D and Blood and all of those games that came before it.
Also the physics puzzles.
Right, and the physics puzzles were somewhat unique, but there was other games that were still doing that, or that were doing that before Half-Life 2 was, or maybe that was their bit of innovation that made that game stick. And I think that that's true, for your MP3 player. I've done the same thing. I have an MP3 player that works really, really well. Same reason why I'll only buy a Sony head unit for my car. They just do it the best. And there's a reason for that, but it's because everyone else has tried because someone had a successful thing. When Sony came out with the Walkman, the very first portable music device ever, everyone else emulated it. And for a while, there was all kinds of Walkmans, and some of them were better, and some of them were worse, and so on. But now we've got, what is the essence of a portable music player? What makes a portable music player the best thing it can possibly be? Also, what makes the base experience in Minecraft the best voxel-based block building game you could possibly have? And what makes Portal? Those things are built on this explosion of copycats that sort of comes up. So you've got one of two things that happens. You either have an explosion of copycats, which I'm certain we're going to see. We're going to see an explosion of HMDs, and I'm actually quite worried that they're going to.
We already have an
market.
explosion of HMDs.
Right. I actually quite worry. I worry significantly that this explosion of copycat HMDs is going to sully the experience of VR for everyone, where people are going to pass it off a little bit and give it a little less cred because there's so much crappy HMD hardware out there. That's a whole different discussion in itself. But that's just it, right?
I mean, that's the same argument. It's the 90% of everything is crap, and people, nobody, everyone knows the name Oculus Rift. No one if people are going to figure out pretty fast that if you're not using an Oculus Rift and you're having a crappy experience, it's probably because you're not using an Oculus Rift. And I think the same is going to be true for VR apps. People are, like, there's going to be, like, 5 VR apps that are super popular, super well-known, and people will be downloading random shit off the internet and playing it on their headset, and it'll be crappy, and they'll say, well, maybe I should have stuck to that super popular game that everybody else likes. And, yeah, I think there's not going to be a huge issue.
Well, yeah, see, okay, I should probably rephrase it. The issue for me is not that, it's not that it'll be hard to find the gems, because they'll the cream rises to the top and all that. The problem is that we live in a world where in order to absorb content, you have to start doing some level of homework, and you also have to dig. Like the fact that there's so much stuff. If I decide I want to play a rhythm-based game on my phone, and I have to start hunting and doing homework now, I have to find out using social media and websites and such, and find the reviews and find whatever else. But before, you didn't have to do that. And yes, some of them will be clear at the top, whatever else. But also, given the disparity of markets these days, with the likes of Five Nights at Freddy's versus GTA versus you name it, something being popular no longer represents quality. It represents that a segregated market likes it. And that market could be completely, like, ironic lol so funny games have reached such a critical mass these days that if you look for games now, you'll find stuff which is actually drivel, which is pure, everyone is aware and agree that it's rubbish, simply on the basis that it's so popular due to the proliferation of YouTubers and Let's Players and whatever else. And that doesn't denote quality anymore. So simply having metrics and numbers isn't guaranteed that it's something good.
I think that's a failure of search engines, though. I think that's a failure of
that's the first thing. That's the first thing I was going to say is, like, when you say you go to find something and you have to work at it, when you say that you can't just search on Google Play and find the game you want, that's partly because Google Play search is terrible and never gives you the thing you want, and it's partly because Google itself is making a challenge to answer the questions that you have about what game you ought to be playing without having to, like, read a whole bunch of different websites. So I mean, it's partly a search problem, and it's partly just it's finding the things that fit your particular needs, which you're unable to really fully explain until you've really absorbed more information. It's finding games you want is work, and it's always going to be work. And if you don't do the work, you're not going to find the game you want. And I think to some extent, that's always been true. Like on the NES, there were a shitload of awful games, and nobody remembers them. But they found the games that they wanted by reading reviews and looking at TV commercials and talking to their friends who had the NES. And they put in the work, and they bought the games that were the best.
We have a lot of indirect marketing now, too, which makes it a lot more difficult. So back in the NES days, in the 80s, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have social media. The only things that you were given were the things that people thought you'd want to buy. So I think we're sort of misappropriating that. Like, we didn't really have a choice back then. The problem I think we have now is that mayonnaise and vanilla custard look the same at a glance. But it's not until you taste it you can tell the difference.
Well, and this is like life, man. If I'm going to go buy a house, I've got to get educated about it and go figure that out and talk to people. And now we have the internet and tools that make doing anything, buying a video game, buying a house, or making decisions, or I've got a health issue, I need to learn more about it. We have now the tools that make it pretty damn easy to sit from home and figure this out. So I just think that's just general life.
I think it's unique because we're in this unique space again. You can't describe VR to someone in an hour, and that's what's interesting about it. You really can't. You have to put one on their face, and I think people are going to make the judgment call based on that situation. And we're back in the Stone Age, and it's really neat.
I think for a while.
Yeah, we are. I think
for a certain while, everybody, a whole bunch of people are like, "This is so amazing!" Like, people are going to be like, "Wow, what is this?" They're going to want to seek it out. They still need to experience it.
So I think actually 360 video and things like that are going to make a big difference. There's going to come a day not too far away where people want to buy a VR game, and the first thing they're going to do is look up YouTube for some gameplay footage of someone going through in a 360 video and just following them around and seeing what they do in the game and what it feels like. And so I don't think we're going to see people like committing to buying decisions before they've had some hands-on experience inside the Rift or inside their H&D.
I think we're being trained against that. I mean, we used to live in a world where a popular distribution model was shareware, where you're actively given a large chunk of the experience and told, try this, play it.
Demos rule.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this, pay money for a guaranteed continuation experience with the same level of estimated quality. And now we live in the inverse. You're expected to pay money, be sight unseen, before you've even seen a picture. Never mind actually play the demo. So
what about free to play?
Yeah, that's a whole different thing.
But even that, I mean, we live in a world where free to play is appropriated with some common terms like free to pay, as it's clearly designed to give you just enough of a taste to appropriate your wallet.
Free to play, like, I mean, it's a tangent, but the issue of free to play is, like he was saying, when when you have a shareware game and you pay, you get, another 5 levels that are much like the first level. Whereas with free to play, it's often the case that you find yourself paying and you end up with kind of a very different experience, and you're just continuing to go up against more and more walls. And every time it's changing your experience over and over again, and you're not able to predict what you're going to get when you pay, really.
And this is all speaking from a game's perspective. We often forget that there's other things that VR will do that are guaranteed. I mean, I will say 100% that they're guaranteed. So imagine being able to, we hear about all these wars and stuff that are going on in other countries, and we can't really, we might see little snippets of things that are going on, like labor protests in Hong Kong. Now imagine being able to be a laborer in the protest in Hong Kong in 360-degree video and see all the people around you. Imagine the impact that that's going to have for news. Right, so we often, we're looking at games in general as a model for what's going to sell VR, but maybe we're all off base because we're old school gamers. Maybe we're all because we're gamers, because we're game developers, or because we've this is video games are our primary interest in VR to start. Maybe we're looking at it the wrong way, and maybe Oculus is thinking about it much differently.
But they adopted a very similar to mobile model. I mean, they clearly.
Right.
They shot themselves in the foot. They basically decided to distribute themselves along the baseline of a mobile model, which is effectively saying to the entire world, aim for cheaper experiences, aim for something that you can pump out, and they've told developers, subtly and subconsciously, that you need to be making games which are small bursts of entertainment. They're not telling you to make AAA titles as much. That's a little bit facetious, and it's a bit sort of shorthanded to say that, but the general point is there. The general point is that they chose a model which is drastically different from the AAA, the AAA PC market of the. It's not. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, you gotta remember though. Everybody has a smartphone that is fast enough to render 3D video at a level that is 5 times that of the fidelity that you had 5 years ago on your PC. So that's interesting. So maybe I think partly they're seeing it that way, and they're also seeing the fact that more people own cellular phones that are capable of this, doing 3D video and other, say, less interactive, less pure video game experiences, and that's how they're going to market VR to mom and dad, because I think that they want to change the way we consume media in general, because there's a very attractive thing about having a completely captive audience. I can't do anything else when I'm speaking to you guys, and I haven't had an experience like this in a long time. I haven't had an experience where I can sit down and speak to people.
That's something of a temporary phenomenon, to be honest.
Right, but I mean,
AR is going to seep into VR very soon. We live in a world where VR experiences are subtle, but when you get to the point where augmented reality is effectively plausible on top of a VR experience, and you've got worlds where you can actually integrate your mail and your whatever else into any VR experience by overlays, effectively akin to the Steam overlays, you're going to have people having chats at the same time as they're playing Call of Duty. It's not
right. But it's certainly less distracting talking to you guys than it would be if I was sitting in front of my monitor, right? Because in a monitor I can have 1,000 windows open, but in VR maybe you're more interested because of the fact that it is more interesting, it is more immersive. I mean, you've got an apple on your head. That's interesting, and you're more compelled to look at that, right? Or Gunter's got this incredibly weird, reflective, flowing surface, because we can do things in the imagination. And I think that by the end of it, it's going to be an arms race for capture of attention. I keep looking over here. I mean, look at Tom. I mean, that's unreal, and that is the most distracting thing you could possibly imagine. And when he walked in here, everybody looked over at him. And I think we're going to have a lot of experiences like that, where people are going to be vying for other people's attention, but simply through the power of VR, you're able to have that captive audience. And even if it is a transient thing, like you're saying, I still think that people who want to make money from this, people who want to get those eyeballs back on the screen again, because they will have that captive audience they've lost. Nobody watches TV anymore. Everybody's watching TV and browsing their smartphone at the exact same time, or live tweeting Game of Thrones. That distractibility is gone right now in VR.
Well, bringing up TV, I mean, that brings up a very primary point, which is that we're starting as an entire society to lean towards service-oriented. I mean,
Right.
I am using Google Music. I have deleted my swaps of 300 gigs worth of MP3s because it was such a pain in the ass to organize and maintain.
And they're more expensive anyway.
Yeah, exactly. You're dealing with single content, which it scales horribly. And yet we have this mobile platform, we have this brand new experiential thing, and yet nobody is really doing that for games yet. Nobody is doing a service-oriented game platform. Nobody's doing a subscriptive service to allow you to be provided with content. And then
People have tried.
There are some actually. Like there's what was it? There was this service that had a bunch of retro games. You know the one I'm talking about? And they would
Yeah, but I
do
can't
like
remember
video
the name.
streaming. Yeah.
Oh wait, yeah, you're something one, isn't it? That's the one that allows you to that's the content streaming service, which was for if you have low-end machines.
OnLive?
Didn't Sony buy them?
On Live, that's the one I'm thinking of.
OnLive, that's the one. Yes.
No, that's exactly right. And I think Sony bought them.
Yeah.
And then everybody came out with the same thing all at once, because now you can stream your Xbox to your PC and whatever else.
Yeah, well, again, I think that was a different issue. I think that was a failing on hardware limitations and such. But the general, like, the brief time I tried that, it was phenomenal. Been able to zoom out, pick a game, and just zoom into it, start playing that, and zoom out, play something else.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Like I would pay, $50 a month to have access to a huge library of thousands of modern and up-to-date titles. Why not?
And as for good.
It sort of reminds me of like GameFly. You
Right.
subscribe to Netflix, DVDs, GameFly, getting sent the games to your house. You can only have so much to play a game, time to play the game. So it's not like owning all these games really making sense, but having a library to tap into, say, hey, I want to play some games.
This isn't even a new idea. You go back to Battle.net, and then before that, Heat. If you remember that, so Heat was, that goes way back.
Well, what do you mean with Battle.net? You couldn't just subscribe one subscription to get you all this.
No, I mean that was specific to their games, but I mean they started out.
Delivery of it.
Right, the delivery of it, and that whole platform of like here's this play these games. You know what's interesting too is if we look at VR chat, because it's Unity based, there's this right now we have the ability with scripted actions to use VR chat like that. You could build VR chat worlds, and each world is a game, and you can hop from world to world to world. And I think that sort of thing will probably happen. We're going to have these. We already have game engines that a lot of people develop for. Like the vast majority of games that have come out recently have been Unity based or Unreal Engine based, and we're going to start seeing that. I think we're going to find where we're going to have all these interconnected experiences where maybe the avatar is the same across all of them, but they're all different games.
Well, that's something I've certainly been thinking about would be a fantastic business model. Is if someone wants to create a service, which is an online cloud service, where you basically provide a core open auth effectively, so like Gravatar or something for that sort of process that other games could use, and combining that with the idea that if you had an I/O for your game, that upon exit of one you could enter another. You could basically transmit your matrix data, your positions, your rotations, your fundamentals, and games would seamlessly allow you to walk from one to the other, completely irrespective of the content. That would allow a really kind of native metaverse, where you don't have a metaverse hub, but instead, like websites, it provides a link that allows you to hyperlink from content to content. that would be phenomenal. Really
Right,
interesting.
where the content may not even be close. You could go from something speculative and futuristic to something, fantasy based, but keep your character and your stats, or even just keep your character. So that's I love that idea, and Tad Williams did that with the whole Otherland concept significantly. They envisioned this VR based simulation where everybody has an avatar, and that avatar can participate in a number of different games. They may be all written by different people, and the fidelity might be different, the graphics quality might be different in each game, but you don't have to leave the experience to go experience something else. So if you decided you wanted to shoot a water gun at somebody for an hour, you could go do that. Or if you wanted to traverse across the savannah and learn about that type of ancient life, you could do that too. So it's that seamless transition in at least a game engine or something similar to it that I think will really sell VR. That ability to just be there somewhere else and live there for a few hours and then go about your regular life afterwards.
Well, that's exactly it. That's the problem for me, is that by setting up a mobile-esque marketing system, something as subtle as setting up their pricing system the way it is they're effectively losing the opportunity to innovate in that space. I mean, it's a whole new platform with a whole new potentials for distribution, whole new potentials for advertising, and the way to actually create a monetized model. And what we've talked about already is the fact that you've got the ability to maintain information and contextualize interest and look detection, all sorts of other interesting things. That we could live in a world where advertising can become prominent again in a way which hasn't gotten to the cartoonish stages we're used to now, where advertisements are just this thing that we subconsciously get used to, like triple clicking and having to do clever things like pop unders and game ads just to get people's attention. If we had VR as an open initial platform again from scratch, we can have billboard ads as literal billboards. We can have all of this different content and advertisements which aren't freezing your experience out by putting an advertisement forced in your face in between each video. And that could be a monetizing method which doesn't interfere with your experience. In the same way that having a paid service allowing you to remove these would allow people who were willing to pay that amount, or people who can afford it, to eke out a better experience for themselves that way, but yet not interfere with the experience of those who can't afford it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with advertisements that were in VR, for various products that I may be interested in using, as long as it's not interfering with what my goals are to begin with. But the fact that we have to make intrusive advertising as it is a necessity of the fact that everyone ignores it. But if you've got someone walking around in here and their avatar happens to have the latest VR headset on their avatar, then that's fine, because that's selling that, and it's not doing it in a way that's bothering me.
So, I mean, I should emphasize, I think Sturgeon's Law will apply here as well. Like, there's going to be a ton of really shitty advertising in VR in any context in which advertising is permitted. And it's there's good and bad advertising. Like, Google has ads in their search results, and they're good. They're unobtrusive. They're generally relevant. And on the other hand, there's the really aggressive kind that you're talking about, and a lot of that is happening, not because it works, but because they're being created by marketers and by people who just don't understand the right way to get through to people and the right way to make effective advertising. And it's about information asymmetry, and I think you're going to have the same kind of thing in VR, where people are making things that are exploiting you and doing bad things to you to try and grab your attention, and are not producing sales, but they do it because they think by being more aggressive they're being more effective.
Okay,
I
so
see
I
alien
wanna
style
stop
face
things.
huggers.
Okay, stop. What was that?
I see alien style face huggers as the new ad.
Yeah.
They'll
Yes,
be crawling
just put
along
the
the
Coke
ground
logo
and
on
they'll
them.
leap up and latch on.
That's one thing
Scared
in
the hell out
VR
of you.
that you
I
can
could
do that you can't
envision,
do
like,
otherwise.
NPC salespeople, like NPCs coming up to you like, hey, you want to buy this? And opening their, codes and trying to sell you virtual watches or something stupid like
That is one thing that we still
do
have yet to deal with.
At some point, wrap some of this up. Yeah, like the virtual, like it looks like somebody you'd want to interact with, but it turns out to be this, AI.
I mean, like the kind of
Gucci.
trolling they'll probably have they'll have like sex sites where they have like beautiful avatar women, and it'll turn
Right.
out that they're just like actually just want to tell you all about like this cool new product.
So, great conversation. I do want to take just a moment to circle back with SVVR. You were there, Jay. Is there anything to highlight or go overview before we end the show? Get you spend a little bit of time on that.
So I saw FOVE. FOVE is pretty amazing. I mean, they're like I said, their latency is not yet on par with the Rift or VIVE or Morpheus. But I mean, they're working on that, and I think it's already like the screen and the latency are already better than DK1, and so it's going to be a very plausible platform for experimenting with eye tracking, and I think there are going to be some very cool demos that exploit it in creative ways. So I'm very excited that that's up on Kickstarter. I definitely, if you haven't seen the Kickstarter, go check it out.
Well, it's a different product, isn't it? I mean, that's the other thing, is that people are assuming that there is a VR headset for all purposes and all times, but that's a marketing tool. That's the kind of thing that you can see exclusively used in marketing stratospheres, in marketing examples,
Right.
and that has a complete dichotomy of use there that is never touches gaming. Like, they have a huge market that they can live on forever and never touch gaming and never be bought by as a commercial device for non-corporate use. So I think it's fantastic, and it's one of the few other headsets I think I'm happy exists. It's great. Go for it, and I think it's going to be really successful.
Especially if it works really well, it's going to prompt everyone else to be reactionary as well, which is good for everyone.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the case where I really want them to be reactionary, because the faster we get reasonably high quality eye tracking into our headsets, the sooner we're going to be able to start exploiting new mechanics that use it, solving problems in better ways, and of course getting that driving down cost of hardware by getting foveated rendering for our high resolution, high field of view displays. Anyway.
That's my number one desired input, by the way, Oculus and everybody else. Whatever you're doing in your headsets, as cool as all the other crap you're coming up with is, eye tracking is my numero uno feature that I think is missing, and every single headset should have it. There's so much scope for some amazing things that can be done with that as a feature.
Like, I honestly think when it's a standard feature, people will look back on the days when you had to center your head on a thing to focus on it, and they will laugh and laugh and laugh, and
For sure.
People are
going
going
to be a big deal.
I think in 10 years we're going to be amazed, because I mean, I remember things that I laugh about now that was 10 years ago that I thought was the best thing ever. I can't even imagine what we're going to have in 10 years' time.
Yeah, it's the presence of it for me. It's the idea that you can use it in ways no one will ever imagine. Just pure passive data calculation, and you don't have to actually have anything that you even recognize as viable. You just notice over time, and you can slowly move widgets, or you can slowly alter the general delays of how long you have to pause on something to get it to open based on the averages of how long people are looking at certain things. You can basically slowly tweak the UI to be as rapid as desired, because you can start to tell when their eyes are moving in a certain direction faster than they realize it, and you can have things which happen before you even realize you wanted to do that yet.
Right, like make everything data driven.
What's bubbling to the surface for me is imagine how wonderful this is going to be for people with physical disabilities.
Yeah.
That too as well. I mean, already the Rift is making a big difference for them.
Mm-hmm. Or Jason, you love superpowers. I mean, this opens up that area using the Force.
My goal is still to own the concept of apotheosis in VR. My goal in my lifetime, my general purpose thing that I hope to be the guy to be involved with, is to create the first game that makes you genuinely feel like you have superpowers. Not pressing buttons, not interacting with stuff. I plan to approximate every power you've ever seen in anything, and do it in such a way where it feels natural, and you get a sense of body motion to it that becomes intuitive to the degree that you genuinely start to have all of the gestures and stuff to the point where it's no longer input. It's an extension of yourself. So yeah, eye tracking, I can think of a bazillion cool things I could do to do that kind of stuff.
What are the things
exactly
that
the kind
really
of gaming
hope
I
happen?
want. I'm dead tired of pressing A.
I would love to see a series of hand gestures that extend to things rather than using a gamepad. So, if I make a peace sign, does that do something? if I make, a series of hand gestures, that should be like a complex input. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that.
And like
Well,
people right now,
Sorry,
I was just gonna say, like, right now, like, a lot of people see, like, people talk about hand gestures right now the way they used to talk about head gestures. People used to say, why would I want to put a thing on my head and be swinging my head all over the place just to look around the game world? That's ridiculous.
Until you do it.
Until you do it, and then you realize, well, you're not swinging your head around. You're making subtle motions to take things in a natural way. And I think it's going to be the same for hand gestures. I think hand gestures are not going to be wild, over-the-top gestures all over the place just to do simple tasks. What they're going to be is subtle gestures, like the same kind of subtle body language that we use in real life, except it'll be doing things. Like you might like kind of vaguely wave your hand towards the place you want to go, and it moves you over in that direction or teleports you to a point over there, something like that.
Exactly. Like that's I've experimented with that a lot. And one thing that is really important I've noticed is there's a fundamental difference between what people consider a gesture, which is the native drawing the letter S in the air, versus extrapolating position over time and targets and getting correct vectors and directions. Because one thing that I did, which was a really simple thing, and it made my life so much more fun, is I did a menu, which is effectively a radial menu that grows up around your hand. You hold a button and a bunch of nodal points appear, and you basically nudge your hand slightly forward out of a dead zone of a couple of small degree, and you let go, and that's your menu selection.
By the way, someone showed a demo of that at the Leap Motion talk today that looked exactly like that.
Oh yeah, I have a video up on YouTube I had from ages. That's a similar idea, but it's so fluid. Like as a person using it, it was intuitive and it worked instantly. And I extrapolated from that a few other examples. Like one of my personal favorite for the telekinesis stuff I've done, the way to accurately throw an object was effectively to use a slingshot. So you select the object, you place your hand, you hold the button down, and then you pull your hand. And then as you move your hand from the point at which you held the button down, you draw a line. And the line changes color, and a sound grows that represents the tension you're applying to that. And when you let go, it flings the object and applies the correct angle and vector that you'd suggested. So with this, I could pick 10 objects in my game world, pick a target, and I could happily lob them all exactly where I wanted to go in a very fluid, just like arc of my wrist, with a very visual indicator of what I'm doing. And combining that with the flick gesture control, it becomes something where there's no barrier between me deciding I want to select those 6 items, throw them through that hole, select that, pick it up, freeze time, rotate it, and scale it. I could do all of that, and I'm no longer trying to figure out the right button. It becomes an intuitive aspect of how I flail my arm. So gestures are going to be completely redesigned in terms of being smoother, because they're not going to be gestures in terms of having to fidelity track your hand. It's the same thing as doing word recognition versus pattern recognition on voice. Matching a certain structured sentence and finding the missing words is monumentally more accurate. You can get 95% accuracy on that versus trying to actually decipher a sentence. And the same is true for gesture control.
And when you combine the input types then, right? So let's say you're making a certain hand gesture and then you say log off. You don't log off when you say log off, but if I make a stop symbol with my hand and put my other hand into another symbol just so that it's something that's locked, that it prevents you from accidentally doing it, so we know that that's exactly what you want, then you can have an input source that's more intuitive than holding the left trigger on a gamepad.
Yeah.
What else are you seeing today?
So I saw a great talk by I forget his name. He was a guy from Leap Motion, one of the co-founders. And he just gave a great talk talking about kind of how he sees the timeline of VR. It was a very Leap Motion centric talk, his vision, but it was he kind of saw like there's been a progression from PC HMDs that were based on cell phones to having portable HMDs. And he envisions a future where there's going to be like sunglasses-sized VR, and the sunglasses will be covered in tiny sensors, and they'll be firing lasers into your eyes, and there won't be anything on the glasses even. And the sensors will be tiny cameras that will be able to examine your entire body and derive all your body position just from that, so it can be used in any location. So it was pretty cool. Let me see. There were a couple other things. I'm trying to remember.
The butt controller, which by the way people need to know that exists. It's hilarious.
Yes, I caught that.
That sounds
It-
awesome.
Yeah, it's a butt controller. It's effectively an analog stick, which is you sitting on a you're sitting on effectively an analog stick. It's done in such a way to keep your central body mass and you're controlling it properly. But effectively, it's a computer case that has a seat on top of it, and it can track your general motion for seated experiences. It's a fun idea. I just don't. It just didn't seem like it was going to have the fidelity or be as comfortable as you'd need for something to be a long-lasting solution. But as a cool thing, there is such thing as a butt controller, which is just I just love that exists.
You know, it's funny because that type of, it sounds silly on the surface, but that type of intuitive input, like right now, I'm swiveling my chair left to right. I kind of wish that the chair would swivel with me. So if I had a way to turn my avatar that matched what I'm doing in real life, I think that would be a little more realistic, and it would feel better for me too. So
But you
putting
could
in
approximate that with something like stomps. You wouldn't need to have an
right,
actual chair.
exactly. You don't need a specifically a butt controller, but I think those types of detected input themselves are quite important for a feeling of presence. Not even for yourself obviously, but also for other people, so that they get a better idea of what you're doing. Because I think body language has become important again in video games. We've been approximating body language through VR, or through characters and NPCs in games to sort of give you an idea of what that character might be doing and how to feel about it, but you don't really get it unless you're there. But being able to use body language with another person gives you that additional layer of communication that we forget about.
So
Yeah.
of course I love Matt Stomps. He let me stay out at his place when I went out to visit for Oculus Connect. But does it not make any sense, or could it not be possible with this whole theme of step into the rift that there could be some sort of tracking on the feet? Get
Just a
mat,
bracelet with some sensors.
some bracelets, so then you can actually see your feet, so it helps you as you're, you can feel the mat, you should be alright, but if you could see where your feet are, would that help?
That is the least plausible theory I've heard so far.
I'm good with those. Glad I can put that out there.
Well, sensor fusion might be a way to go with that, just having some sort of bracelet which has a gyroscope that does its basics, and you can have them on your feet and on your wrists. It's one of those, just like a little exercise bracelet, and then maybe it has some LEDs or some other indicator that sort of feeds it into a global tracking system and gives yourself the ability to extrapolate out the correct information. That's plausible. And
I don't know.
Is it
I think we're
useful?
thinking about it too much, that we might need something physically on our bodies for fidelity like that. I mean, look at the Kinect. It does such a good job already. I mean, we have the solution. It is occlusion with lasers.
Yeah, but I think as time goes by, the thing of obfuscation from the camera and occlusion is going to become a bigger deal, because we're going to start growing to the point where the VR is not going to be an isolated experience. It's not going to be you sitting in a room by yourself. It's going to be you either in the corner of your sitting room with other people moving around, or you're going to be in larger social spaces.
Well, that's why Lighthouse is such a stroke of genius. It's not an input device. It's simply providing the metric that your separately connected input device will use, allowing you to have shared.
Lighthouse still has occlusion limitations, though.
Right. Right.
You're not
but I
going to
mean,
have a rave party in a Lighthouse room.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're playing a shooting game, if you're playing the equivalency of paintball or something like that, and you've got 10 people running around a scene, ducking under walls and such, you're going to have a hell of a time. You're going to have a very hard time managing that to the degree you want to.
That being said, how is the Void doing it?
Probably some proprietary mocap.
Yeah. Plus they're giving that you have stuff on you, too. Not entirely,
Right.
but you've got enough. You've got enough that they can use that sort of combined.
Yeah,
Like
you have a laptop on your backpack. I mean, that's really what they're doing. But at the same time, how are they? Yeah, maybe you've got markers, but I think that's all we would need. I don't think we need to think about an active device providing the motion input data. I think it's going to be a passive device at best.
I don't know, because I think the world, the day we get proper VRs and we start using haptics that are real, I think approximating haptics through any kind of like air pressure or any other method like that is entirely going to be cool but impractical. What you really need is a deforming, altering room. You need the context of walls which will slide outwards, and you need floors which can become staircases. And
You all need to read Otherland by Tad Williams. Now imagine a hyperbaric immersion chamber. So a chamber with an aerogel that is responsive to electrical impulse that allows you to both increase the viscosity and decrease the viscosity while you're in it. So that's just one idea.
Well, yeah, like we have the concept now of phones, which will be coming out soon, which have the
Exactly.
ability to create haptic buttons and stuff.
A physical haptic button, yeah.
Yeah, so it's entirely plausible. You can have, and it doesn't even have to have much heft to it. We've already established that people are disinclined to walk through physical objects in VR. You don't need to actually go and make things solid. You could just have cardboard, which is maneuvered in such a way as to vaguely shape a wall. Because you're going to hit it, and you're going to put your hand out and go, well, I'm not going any further. It's clearly a wall.
Right.
You can see it as a wall. So when you get to that stage, you're going to have real-world occlusion. You're going to have you climbing into a barrel and like climbing and hiding, or you're going to be crawling through a vent. And sure, it's just going to be a little piece of cardboard around you that vaguely feels like walls, but it's going to completely occlude you. You're going to need to have some onboard personal tracking that, even if it's just for brief intermittency, to give you, to keep their positional data until you get back in line of sight. Just
I
the same
think
way
that'll
that
all be microchipped into the HMD itself. Maybe that'll have coprocessors as well that'll sort of take care of that. I think that's really interesting too.
Yeah, but not with beginning the hands. Like, that's fine for your head, and that gives you general position. But if you're, again, on your hands and knees, crawling, picking up dropped bullets in the middle of a vent, trying to rearm your gun, you're going to need finger tracking in a space where you don't have any kind of access to anything optical. So
Well, yeah.
I have no problem with that personally. I mean, yeah, not every experience, and that's the whole beauty of the whole segregation of market. You can have a lot of stuff which is sitting room experiences between 5 or 6 people,
And then digital out of home. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so for your large scale experiences, you'll probably be wearing gloves and all sorts of other nonsense. And I don't mind going out to an event and taking 15 minutes to put on a myriad of stuff, and then running around a very specific space to get myself absolute immersion, and then going home to my slightly lesser kit. I mean, that's what consoles are. They're basically slightly smaller entire arcades. So but it won't be the be all end all. We will need something, some kind of personal tracking when you start talking about those sort of experiences.
No, I agree. For digital out of home, especially, there's so much that you're right about these tricks that you can do. You can do, where a straight hallway is actually a curved hallway in reality. They were talking about in the interview for the Void itself. They talked about how all you need is about 4 inches to convince someone that there is an endless chasm in front of them.
Directed walking, yeah, as well. I mean,
Exactly.
We're definitely going to be doing a lot of that.
Yeah, Deep Ricker put an article up. Deep Ricker hangs out here all the time. He got to go and try that out in Salt Lake with you then.
Well,
Wow.
that's actually something that we're playing with as well for our little game. Is the idea of having being VIVE targeted is that we're dealing with room space, but room space is limiting. So how do you get around some of the limitation of room space? So trying to deal with dilation of movement is very interesting. Like, imagine having a revolving door, but the speed at which you process yourself stepping through the revolving door is different, so that we can reroute you back 180 to where you were, but you feel like you've done just a quarter turn to get yourself into the next room. If we can direct you in such a way as to maintain you in space, in a smaller space, we don't have the luxury of a giant directed walking area to kind of, or not giant, but enough to give yourself that much space. There's ways for us to approximate things like dual-sided elevators that open up, or even altering the world space so that it steps kind of retro style in the way we used to play games like Zelda, where the entire world just shifts a block and keeps you in the same sphere. There's going to be a whole load of really clever ways to maintain this idea of spatial growth, but yet keeping in the same physical location.
I love it. It's going to be so much fun.
It's fantastic to talk about. So we are going to wrap things up unless every day you have any other gems to throw at me. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate
No,
all
not
you
right
guys
now.
coming out.
Yeah, it's getting late, man. I think we're out of all our clever
We were
ideas.
like 3 hours. Yeah, we went way further.
It was a good one.
Yeah, it's a very good one. We got some, great people here to talk a lot of good stuff. You guys want to plug anything, Jason?
Yeah, I suppose I'll just reiterate. I worked on Colossus. Again, we'll be putting up a post-mortem on exactly how he did things and our decisions on certain aspects, which will be up on the subreddit soon, like a couple of days, I think. Aside from that, I'm a member of the Left-Handed VR podcast, So if you like listening to me rant, that's pretty much all it is. It's an entire podcast of me hating things and telling people why they're wrong, with Matt and Bob's correcting me all the time when I get a bit ranty. And then as well as that, there's our upcoming game, Echo Red, which it's basically teaser stage now. Nothing enough to really talk about yet, but it's coming. And I think, Nate would probably kill me if I didn't mention Team Metatron. I'm a member of that, as is Gunter and a few other people here. Is that we're basically a collective more than a team of people dedicated to some open source VR hardware and VR software and producing some of these solutions that we talked about with ServiceX and coming up with games globally as a group and coming up with some really fun ideas. So if you are getting into game development in any way, shape or form, and you want to work with like-minded people and try out something new and work with a larger group than you'd have the luxury to do by yourself, feel free to give us a shout. We're pretty much open to just adding more people and coming up with some cool experiments. So give Team Metatron a shout. You can find us on the subreddit, or you can what is it, metatronvr.com, Gunter? Is that our website? You have to remind me.
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, so that's us. Let's Sound a VR podcast on all the various platforms, and yeah, plug's over. That's me.
Thank you. Awesome. VR fanboy, do you have anything to plug, or would you like to shout out to anybody? Stuff.
No, I'm good. Well, there's one thing. I haven't caught the Left-Handed VR podcast in a while. And the last time I listened to it, you asked who's the most Irish, and I've never gotten an answer to it.
Oh yeah, we never officially gave that, did we? Well, I was actually born in England, and my mother's Canadian, so despite the obviousness, no, I'm not actually the most Irish, and the correct answer is, funnily enough, it's Bob. But I'll let him explain in the next episode as to why that's true.
And how about you, D?
Alright, usual stuff. I'm D from eVRydayVR. That's my YouTube channel, eVRydayVR. And I'm also I'm kind of doing freelancing, so I'm always on the lookout for good opportunities for people I can help out with VR development stuff. So you can check out my VR portfolio and blog and resume and stuff at my VR portfolio website, which is dcotzmedia.com. That's my name. It's spelled DCOETZEE.com. And yeah, and on the About page of my YouTube page, there's an email if you want to ask me any questions or whatever, or you can message me on Reddit. Don't care. I'm always happy to answer questions. That's all.
Cool. And finally, me.
Yeah, I am deep in my white collar corporate life, so I don't have a lot of time to blog anymore. But and I got a 5-year-old daughter and stuff. But I always share my experiences in VR, and I'm kind of a helpful guy because I do that for a living. I'm a quality assurance guy, and I'm helping people in troubleshooting all day long. So I kind of just bring my work home all the time. You'll find me all over Reddit. My username doesn't change; it's everywhere. You can add me on Steam if you want to see what I'm playing lately. I do have a Twitter as well. It's DYLHUN. My real name is Dylan, so Lhun, Dylan. So if it makes any sense there now. But that's so that's me. But yeah, I'm all over. Mostly on Reddit. I'm kind of prolific around there. I do a lot of troubleshooting, especially for DirectX 10. If you have new hardware, if you're having trouble with your Oculus Rift, the answer is usually easy, and I'm willing to help. You can usually find some sort of rant because I like many people in VR are very impatient, and I was able to discover a bug with Oculus and give them some insight on their own hardware simply because I couldn't wait for DirectX 12 and Windows 10 and became a one-man army. So that's the sort of thing I do. So you'll find me all over there. I may end up reviving foreverconnected.org. It's a decade-old domain that I've had for ages and ages, and I'll probably end up putting some blogging and that sort of thing up there. I do have a few skunkworksy type communication projects that I want to use for social VR. Not in this extent, but more for ease of life type applications. I don't know if they'll ever come to fruition, but I think that VR is lacking a lot of what we earlier spoke about. Things like the ability to check your email while you're in the headset, and I think that I'd like to provide a universal platform to do that. So you might find that on Forever Connected, but in the far-flung future, depending on how much time I get.
Fantastic. And I want to thank all of you guys. For me, it's very humbling to have all of you guys come out here, talk to me, share this insight that you all have. It's such a breadth of knowledge, and our audience, I'm sure, loves it, and the viewers. So I love you guys. It's really great. I want to thank, of course, the audience as well. Kenny, Orktat, Tom, Kirito, Aaron, they all helped me out with this stuff. Fructious, he built this cool avatar I'm wearing. And I can't thank the VR chat devs enough, Jesse and Graham. And I thank anybody else that I might be forgetting. Don't forget to join us here every week on sets. It's always a good time, Tuesdays, 9:30 Eastern. And reach out to me and let me know what you think of the show. Just go to guntersuniverse.com and you can find all the ways to contact me through email, Teams, Skype, Reddit, all that good stuff. And don't forget, on Sundays we have a great meetup here in VR Chat where we explore many of the worlds created by our users, and that happens at 6 p.m. Eastern. And with that said, thank you very much, and have a great night.
Night, night.
Thanks.
I would have music, but I don't have it mapped right now, so it's awesome. Thank you, everybody. There is a secret button where I have to trigger my music capability back here.
It's like a red version of that dude
And
from...
I forgot to trigger it before I came up here. Yeah, now we can dance a little. I'm exhausted.
Whatever happened to the idea of having the audience get eaten by a giant monster at the end of the show?
Somebody turned
I
it into
get
an
that.
animation with, like, shader effects, which would be fantastic. You can do that now.
Just everybody gets rocketed out of their seats into oblivion.
That would be actually really cool.
GTF FOVE.
The Gunters universe explodes, literally.
Every day is
Five.
backing out.
Hey.